the government just can't simply stop lying about what's going on with all of this. So even though aliens are not the number one thing I go around preaching about, and non-human intelligence is not my number one possibility here, I'm absolutely open to it. And that's why I'm open to people like David Grusch who come out and say, hey, the government has wreckage from non-human technology and craft, that there's bodies, the biologics that he referenced. I am definitely open to that.
My guest today is John Greenewald Jr., an author, writer, and researcher who runs the Black Vault website, famous for its treasure trove of government-related documents that focus on the strange and mysterious. He has amassed almost 4 million documents that he received through the Freedom of Information Act, otherwise known as FOIA. The Freedom of Information Act is the United States federal freedom of information law that requires the full or partial disclosure of previously unreleased or uncirculated information and documents controlled by the U.S. government upon request. All documents are free to download on John's website. Link in the description. And although John covers many topics, most people know him from ufology, as do I. So today we'll cover his most recent article, covering documents he received from a FOIA request about David Grusch, Christopher Mellon, Sean Kirkpatrick, and AARO, that seems to be based around why David Grusch never gave his testimony to AARO, the Pentagon's office to study UFOs. We'll also look over more recently released documents that detail a rejected prospective special access program to study UFOs and remote viewing called KONA BLUE. If you're new to the channel, y'all, and you like content like this, please hit that subscribe button. I put out a new video every day, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And please hit that like button, vetters. That really helps out the videos. So thank y'all so much for the support there. And of course, comment down below. What do you think about my conversation with John? So without further ado, let's give a warm, vetted welcome to my guest, John Greenewald Jr. All right, welcome to Vetted. Got a great guest for y'all today. His name is John Greenewald Jr. You know him as the Black Vault. John, welcome to the show, man. Pleasure to have you.
I appreciate being here. Thanks for the invite.
Hell yeah, man. So real quick, just a little backstory before we get into some of these exciting topics that I'm sure people are going to want to hear from you from, especially this David Grusch news. Just give us a little backstory for, maybe some people that haven't heard of you, just sort of, a little bit who you are and kind of how you got into this topic.
Sure. I started now, gosh, we're approaching 30 years. I was 15 years old, and I had kind of read some stuff about UFOs and various stories, and never thought that I would, be like a researcher, somebody that would really actively do research versus just reading about it. And long story short, heard about this thing called the Freedom of Information Act. And at 15 years old, I had zero clue what that was. I had no idea how the U.S. government worked, and kind of taught myself how to use the FOIA because I read what were these alleged government documents. And I thought, there's no way that this is real. I mean, the government wants to deny that the UFO phenomenon is real, and they don't have an interest. And I read this 1976 Iran incident document, very infamously known in UFO, stories for years, well before I was even born. And I read it and thought there's no way it was real. And sure enough, it turned out to be real. And it was at that moment I was hooked, and I started filing FOIA requests, sending them out to the U.S. government by 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 at a time, looking for documents. And then the Black Vault is essentially what I was looking for when I was 15 for government documents, but it didn't exist. I mean, this was 1996 when I started. So the internet was a different beast back then. I learned the internet on AOL for DOS 1.0. So, it was much, much different than what you see today on X and stuff like that. So I built what I was looking for. And here we are again, 27 plus years later. That is what I wanted then. I mean, granted, technology has changed, but a place for free that you can go and download government documents. And although I write articles and of course have an opinion like everybody does, what I want is the ability for people to have access to the raw information, the information that you can download, that if you're interested in my opinion or anybody's opinion that's writing about them, great, read it. But if you're not, then you have access to create your own opinion to all that raw information. And that's what I find as kind of the biggest value to it. So now it's grown to about 3.3, almost 3.4 million pages of government documents on all sorts of different government secrets. UFOs has always been pretty much the number one most popular, but it deals with pretty much any government secret you can imagine, and give it away for free. It's there's no registration charge or even registration requirement. You can go on there, start downloading. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Wow. Over 3 million document coming up on 4 million. That's like insane. That's totally insane. Is it, as you were saying that, I had a quick question, just a quick thought jumped to mind. Is it illegal to sell FOIA documents? Or
no, it's actually not illegal.
An access or something, like you were saying? Oh, it's
yeah,
not.
it's all considered public record, and there's no copyright on U.S. government material. There is, however, a change to your fee status when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act as a requester. So, for example, if I said, hey, give me everything you've got on, I'm just making this up here, but the F-117 stealth fighter, and they give that to you through FOIA, and then you turn around and sell exactly what they gave you, you're considered a commercial requester. And even though that is perfectly legal, you do have to pay certain fees to do that and so on. So yeah, that's kind of the difference there, but no copyright. The English government's a little bit different in the UK. They actually copyright to the Crown their information. So you technically do have a copyright restriction publishing their documents. However, I've kind of, I don't really think that the Crown, the now king, is going to come after me for publishing UFO material, as silly as that sounds. So I do have a lot of government documents from the UK, but I respect the copyright and attribute it to the Crown. But other than that, I don't think anybody really minds that much. But U.S. government copyright doesn't apply.
That's interesting. No, that would be quite a bucket list item to cross off, having the UK king come after you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen weirder things happen in this field. Yeah, so, nothing surprises me anymore.
Why? That might be the most true statement we make in this interview today, right?
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I'm sure a lot of people like myself are curious about the whole process of FOIA and how it goes. I was always curious about that. What are some of, like, before we jump in here, like, what are some of the top things you like about the process, and what are some of the things you wish would change about the FOIA process?
Well, a lot of people bash FOIA, and what I've learned over the years is that the people that bash FOIA 99.9% of the time have never used it, and largely don't understand it. FOIA is not perfect. There's two things that I always say up front that I think a lot of people forget about me. The FOIA is not the end all be all. I've never said that. I've never believed in that. Even from when I was 15, knew that the government was hiding something. I wasn't sure to what extent. I mean, I was just starting my research, but I never thought that the FOIA would give me that smoking gun. But what it does do is it offers kind of a peek behind the curtains. It starts giving you pieces of evidence that if you didn't request it, would likely never see the light of day. And I've got literally millions of pages of examples to that, to where the government just doesn't start releasing their information to you. A lot of times you have to fight for it. So that's one of the great things about FOIA is, again, if you're looking for the alien smoking gun, you're likely not going to find that. Hopefully I'm proven wrong one day. But that's not what it's about. What it's about is trying to get every piece of the puzzle that you would otherwise not get. And I think that that's what a lot of people who bash the FOIA just really don't understand, in that it does offer that peek behind the curtain. But there's also downsides to it. I mean, there's a lot of shortcomings to it, like the amount of time that you sometimes wait, which can extend over a decade in time, to where when you file a request, takes them years, sometimes over a decade. My record is 14 and a half years waiting for a document to come. Yeah. I wish I was kidding.
14 and a half years. Yeah. What the hell? I mean, by then,
just last week I published one that was a decade, nearly a decade. So it's like, you look at that and it's like, wow, FOIA needs help, and it absolutely does. So it's by far not perfect, but it is an
Sure.
incredibly powerful tool to give you access to documents, like I said, that would never see the light of day in most of the cases if you have to go after it through FOIA. So there's a lot of pluses to it, and it's something that I think shouldn't be discounted. And one of the things I always get a kick out of is usually the people that bash FOIA and say you're never going to get anything good by it. I've seen time and time again those same exact people tout FOIA documents to prove how important the UFO topic is. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I thought FOIA didn't prove anything, you know? And I
Yeah.
don't know if they're willingly or knowingly doing it or what. But it's clear FOIA has a value, and it has a value for numerous reasons. And it's one that I fully support the freedom of. And although I know that it needs help, man, it gets you some stuff, and sometimes you have to sift through a haystack for that needle, but sometimes that needle comes at you and it's golden.
What's like the greatest document you've gotten from FOIA, and what's the biggest disappointment you feel you've gotten from FOIA?
That's always a tough question to answer, only because it depends on what you're looking for. Even with just saying, "Hey, what's the best UFO document?" It's so hard because there is so much there. And I think that that's another misconception about me, albeit I'm very skeptical about the claims of today and you know the David Grusch type stories where they're holding alien bodies and wreckage and so on. Although you know skeptical about that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
there are so many documents that you could name to answer your question that support that this is a massive cover up of some kind. We're not covering up drones and balloons in totality. It's part of the conversation, absolutely, but that's not everything. And I know that some skeptics and debunkers out there think that that's all that this is now, but it's not. And I think that the documentation proves that, because when you go back in time and you start looking at CIA documents, you start looking at DIA documents, start looking at NSA documents, just those three agencies alone off the top of my head have hundreds upon hundreds, even well over 1,000 pages that shouldn't even exist. And if you take what I call the government's company line about UFOs, yet they do. And it shows that whatever these phenomena are, because I think there's multiple facets to it. So I use the plural version. But whatever these phenomena are, it is something at the top secret level in many cases. On top of that, I believe that it's easily proven not exempt through just sources and methods. Another thing a lot of skeptics and debunkers, including the government itself, falls back on. So you can start like kind of notching these things off the list of why these documents exist and why they are so heavily classified and redacted. So it's the long way of answering your question, and I'm not dodging it, but it's so hard to round it down to one or two records because it
Sure.
depends on how you look at this. I can tell you some of my top favorites include an Air Force manual. This was well before even ATIP or OSAP or any of those stories existed back in the early 2000s, where the United States Air Force, the one military branch that has been mum about this topic as a whole, had a regulation on the books that was actively updated. I was able to prove that through FOIA, nothing left over from the 1960s, that instructed them to report unidentified flying objects. That's a quote. UFOs was in there. And yet they were claiming, hey, we did this through the 60s. We don't care. Don't bother us with your story. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they had this manual, specifically it's Air Force instruction 10-206, if anybody's taking notes, that it was on the books. And at the time, the Huffington Post was going to profile a couple documents that I had come forward, very much rooted to the question that you asked, what's some of the faves and most popular. And so I had given him that one. And to make this kind of longer story short, they were pushing the Pentagon for an answer, saying, hey, you guys are saying one thing, but look at this document that came out through FOIA. John's got it online, and you can actually download it from the Air Force website. This was true again back in the mid to late 2000s. So what happened? Within 48 hours of the Huffington Post pushing that question with the Pentagon, and they never responded to him until after they completely rewrote Air Force Instruction 10-206, removed the entire Chapter 5, which included UFOs in it, and then got
Wow.
back to the Huffington Post and said, oh, well, that was just something left over. We were updating it and so on. Within 48 hours of them highlighting this. And credit to the late Lee Spiegel, a friend of mine for many, many years, who sadly passed away here in the last few months. But a great investigative journalist, and he was the one that was pushing the Pentagon on that. So that's one document, right? I mean,
Wow.
that whole story in itself is something fascinating. But then when you look at some of the specific cases, like the 1976 Iran incident that has been around, UFO books and conversations for decades. But you look at that and you realize, hey, this was post Project Blue Book. This was something that we cannot explain here in 2024 still. There's no good skeptical analysis of this. But on top of that, the US government, and this is provable by additional documents that came out, the case itself went all the way to the White House. And the point being is that even post Project Blue Book, the president himself was still getting these UFO reports on a phenomenon that didn't exist. That didn't make sense. So when you look at all that evidence, there are
Yeah.
lots of documents that you can kind of fill in the blank there to answer your question. And that's just a couple of them.
Yeah, right on. I mean, honestly, that answer is telling unto itself. The fact that there's not some document right off that you fire off, right? Like this one is, super, whatever. That's interesting in and of itself, that answer, right? Considering how many documents you have FOIA'd, the database that you have, how long you've been doing this. That's very telling. It's like, remember when I interviewed James Fox, the whole reason I even started Vetted after he'd done Moment of Contact, and I interviewed him. And I asked him, hey, well, what do you think about this, phenomenon? Like, what are your personal beliefs? And he's like, well, I'm at this, I don't know. Right. It's his definitive answer is, I don't know what's going on. I'm at the same place I was when I started 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought that's interesting. Right. Do you feel kind of the same way? Like you're at the same wall you've been at since you began looking at, like, everything takes you laterally. It doesn't take you forward, or it takes you back, right? In that, is that how you feel? Or I don't know. I'm curious.
So, not to you respectfully disagree with my friend James Fox, but from my own personal point of view, I do feel that I've changed a lot in the last 27 years. But I feel that's on a few different fronts. I feel that it reinforces my belief that I had determined when I was a teenager that the government is covering this up, that it's not an easy answer, that this isn't sources and methods or their government top secret programs, and that explains it all. I don't think that it's that easy. But here, 27 plus years later, I've also become more skeptical. I've been more cautious on who I listen to and who I essentially collaborate with, just simply because you have so much crud out there that you have to sift through. That has made me much more skeptical. I don't find that a bad thing. I know that there are some circles that don't like me for that reason, and it's because in one breath I can say with evidence this is a massive cover up. I can find nuclear weapons secrets easier than I can UFO information. I can prove that to you with government documents and FOIA cases that go back decades. But in the same breath, I can say, yeah, you know what? I am skeptical about the claims of Luis Elizondo or David Grusch or both of them, simply because of the lack of evidence that's there. And you have to look at every small piece of the puzzle and put it all together. And in my book, it's okay to say those two things in the same breath, meaning it's okay to say, I question this story because, but it's also okay to be open to either direction that the answers may flow to you. And this recent David Grusch document batch that I got from the government, that is kind of proof that it's like, well, I'm wanting the answers. I want every little piece of the puzzle, but I can't control where they go, and I think that there's a lot of selective belief out there by some people. So to go back to your question, I feel that I have changed a lot, but I feel that where I was when I was 15 when I started has also been reinforced a lot. So I think it kind of goes to both sides of the debate.
Yeah, right on. What year were you born, John? Am I allowed to ask that? I don't want to push.
No, that's okay. 43 years ago yesterday, well, at least when we're recording this, in 1981. I'm getting old.
That's right. Happy birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
belated birthday.
Thanks.
81. Okay, I'm a 79 baby. All right, so we're basically
Oh,
the
so is my
same.
wife. Although, ooh, I
Same
shouldn't have said
age.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always give her a hard time. A little bit
You
younger,
can't
born in a different decade. I know I can't say that.
you can't be doing that, man.
No, I know.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, that's cool. So we're about the same age. All right, yeah, I get it. No, that's a great answer. Look, let's go into the David Grusch after I ask you this last question. Because I get asked this too all the time. Not that I think it's important, but I think a lot of my audience will want to know the answer. So that's why I'm going to ask. What are your overall thoughts? Like, I know using believe is a interesting word to use, but just for conversation's sake, I'll use that word. Like, what do you believe about the phenomena? Like, are you 100% sure there is a phenomena? You're on the, I don't know. What are
Well,
your,
I believe that there's, a phenomenon, again, I use plural phenomena of some kind. Why do I say that? I think there's ample proof. I think that the
but like when
cases
you
go
say that, you mean like non-human phenomena, or what do you mean?
I can't prove the non-human thing. And, from a personal standpoint, this isn't a cop out, and I hope you don't take it as one. I
No,
really
no.
don't know. I don't know the answer to that part of it.
I say
I
the
know
same thing. I'm just
Yeah.
curious what your question is. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, 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 that's okay. No, when it comes to the non-human intelligence, the extraterrestrial question, I just genuinely don't know. I am that kind of person that needs to see to believe. So from a
Yeah,
personal standpoint, yeah, I need the proof. I need the evidence. So from that standpoint, I just don't know. But I can say that I'm open to it. And why am I open to it? I believe that there's ample evidence to support the openness to it. And that comes, just from official verifiable evidence, not
that's interesting.
someone told me in a dark alley
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
It has nothing to do with that, but rather there are too many cases throughout government files that show technology that were beyond the scope of the technology at that time. Meaning, when you go back to even some of the Project Blue Book cases, when you look at some of the estimates of how fast they were going, what type of technology was being displayed, even the 1976 Iran incident, where it seemingly and strategically shut down two separate F-4 Phantom jets. When you look at that, and then here in 2024 can't attribute that to any type of technology, that's when I say that I'm open to some of these more extraordinary possibilities, albeit a little less likely than something easily explainable, right? So
sure.
I recognize that, but I'm also open to it. And one of those bigger reasons why I'm open to it, other than what I just mentioned, is the fact that the government just can't simply stop lying about what's going on with all of this. And I think that
Yeah,
if it was top secret classified technology, you would never have the traction that you've gotten here in the last few years of these investigative programs. Are they playing a game of charades and, just wanting to appease the general public? Sure, yeah, maybe. But you're then discounting the decades worth of evidence that in some cases, when they were written, the Freedom of Information Act wasn't passed. So they never thought some of this information would ever be out in the open, and yet here we are. So when you look at the totality of all that evidence, that's where that openness has to be there, just based on investigation, research, and common sense. So even though aliens are not the number one thing I go around preaching about, and non-human intelligence is not my number one possibility here, I'm absolutely open to it. And that's why I'm open to people like David Grusch, who come out and say, hey, the government has uh, wreckage from non-human technology and craft, that there's bodies, the biologics that he referenced. I am definitely open to that, because the level of secrecy that I've seen over the decades, not only from personal research, but from the evidence at hand, that could start to make certain things make sense. But you have a big gap between this dot and this dot over here. It's huge. So you have to connect that dot. And for me, that dot from point A to point B isn't connected yet. Am I open? Absolutely. That's why I listen to it. I think most debunkers just will dismiss it, but they're not actively trying to confirm anything. They're just out there going, well, it's too extraordinary, so it can't be true. Well, I don't operate off of that. That's why I file those FOIAs. FOIA is not everything, but it does offer that peak. And look what happened. We got a stack of documents, communications, text messages between Christopher Mellon and Sean Kirkpatrick. That was a bit of a surprise to me. When you look at what then comes to you through FOIA, you can't help but just say, hey, look, there's more to the story than what we're just hearing in these other podcasts and YouTube channel shows and stuff like that. There is a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not privy to, and FOIA's pulling some of it out. This, what you got on your screen there, is a prime example.
Yeah, man. Look, it has your address. Do I need to cut
That's
that
okay.
out?
No, that you're
Okay,
fine.
I figured
That's
it
a
was
public,
because you
it's a
put it
public
on
address.
your,
Yeah.
yeah, you
It's
put
a,
it on your website,
yeah.
and I mean, it came with the
I appreciate the
document, but
concern though. I get that a
yeah, of
lot too.
course.
You're showing your address. I'm like,
I
nope.
was like, oh god. I mean, I was like, oh no.
No, you're fine. I
Someone has
appreciate it
put
though.
my address up on Twitter, and I was like, oh Jesus Christ,
No.
people
Yeah,
like
all
coming
good.
after me. Okay, cool. Yeah, these are basically the documents you're talking about, man. You weren't joking when you sent me that DM. Like, I think you're gonna like this, what I just published. I was like, yes, you are correct. This is absolutely fascinating what it came with. Why don't you just kind of break down the story you broke here
Sure.
a little bit?
Yeah, there was the root of it goes to the claims and kind of that he said story between Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and David Grusch. And essentially what spawned this request was essentially David Grusch saying, "Hey, I'm willing to talk to AARO, but they haven't gotten back to me or returned my phone call." I'm paraphrasing there, but essentially that was his stance at the time that I had filed this particular FOIA. That has changed a little bit because I want to be fair that he's since said that AARO didn't give him the proper evidence that they were cleared to hear everything. And we can talk about that in a couple minutes. So I want to make note of that up front, that he has kind of amended that a little bit. But that was the claim from David Grusch. That from Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was essentially he reached out to him through connections and directly, and he never responded / wouldn't come in. So I thought, okay, well, look, if they're not in a skiff, it's likely not classified information because David Grusch was not part of the government anymore around this time. And if they're communicating, it was likely through insecure channels. And with that being said, to someone like me, it makes it a lot easier to access through FOIA. It's a lot harder to hide information that's unclassified. Personal identifying information, a little bit different, but regardless, I can cross that bridge, and I'll deal with those types of redactions to kind of show you what I mean with what you had on the screen there. My address, if you were to request that letter, would be redacted just for privacy reasons. So I deal with those types of redactions, not a big deal. But I was looking for just the meat of these communications. Well, what I got was a little bit more than what I thought. It showed a memorandum for the record that was written in January of 2024. It was at the top of the release package there. There it is right there.
Here, right?
And what it did was it essentially outlined all of the attempts to contact David Grusch. That it essentially put this memorandum for the record on the record within the DoD that said, hey, on this date we did this, on this date we did this. And to further support this memo, they had attachments to it, which included communications between Christopher Mellon and Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, and talking essentially like Christopher Mellon was that middleman, and Dr. Kirkpatrick is saying, and again, this is paraphrasing, I invite you all to read the text messages, they're all there, but essentially saying, look, you should come in, we're willing to talk to him, the clearance is there, and so on. And then Mr. Mellon was essentially saying and questioning that clearance, but that he would pass it on. So it's a very interesting exchange that actually gets a little bit, shall we say, testy between the two.
Yeah, it's interesting. I found it interesting
that
they were. I found it interesting that they were signal messages, like encrypted. Like, how did that? I guess that's all. If you're communicating on behalf with the government or something like that, becomes that communication then becomes available, public information, or what?
That is correct. So it was like
encrypted.
Yeah, because I was accused online the morning that I had published it by someone, and I don't even try and get into the weeds with some of these people, but they were appalled that I would publish these particular communications, that the privacy reasons should take over and so on. Now, number one, this is considered public record. Now, when you communicate with a government official through government email addresses and so on, you become essentially part of that public record. And someone like Mr. Mellon would likely know that already, simply because of his work in government, that those communications become public record and FOIA-able. That includes emails, text messages, all of that type of communication back and forth, even though it's with a private citizen, all becomes public record. So that's why I've been able to get, let's say, Bigelow Aerospace or Bass emails through FOIA when a lot of people said you can't do that. They were communicating with the FAA years ago about UFOs. So yeah, I think that there's a misconception there on how or why these would come out. It's not malicious
Yeah,
on the side of the government. It's well known. If you
for
communicate
sure.
with the government, then it becomes part of public record. Now, the exemptions will apply on personally identifying information. So Mr.
Sure.
Mellon's phone number that they were texting, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff is redacted. But regardless, the communications themselves are not. So I just wanted to address that point real quick.
No, no, for
And
sure.
you can see the back and forth. And what was to back to your point about the signal, I was a little surprised to see that method of communication. What that it stems from, I don't know. It may have been Dr. Kirkpatrick's preference. It may have been Mr. Mellon's preference. This release doesn't really say that at all. So I'm not really sure there, at least as of the recording of this with you. So I don't know why they used Signal. There's other text messages that were there that obviously were not. That was with a individual that is not revealed. That was considered private information. So that was likely maybe someone who's currently active in the government or somebody not
Uh,
publicly known. So the Privacy Act, which kind of goes hand in hand with the Freedom of Information Act, it's sometimes hard to figure out then who will they redact when it comes to a name versus who they won't. So it kind of varies from agency to agency. But you will see those text messages as well. So that was another associate of Grusch that AARO was reaching out to saying, hey, can you get him to come in? So it was an
yeah, I saw
interesting.
that. I want to go over all of those
Mhm,
messages too. Like, let's, we'll go over. Let's start with this one real quick. Let's
mhm.
start with like the timeline of, because that's kind of the big story, right? That happened last year was that here before I bring this up, but that Grusch was kind of going back and forth with Kirkpatrick in, the media, if you will, I guess, through statements and stuff like, hey, you haven't reached out to me. Kirkpatrick say, no, I have. We've tried to get you into AARO. Grusch say, no, you haven't. I don't have any communication. A lot of, all this. I made several videos about it. So
Yeah.
I definitely know the backstory about it. And then seeing this, it kind of changes the story, to be honest with you. And with, again, actual evidence of a lot of these email communications that happened. So let's you did a great job of laying out this timeline on your website. Again, I'll put links in the description, y'all, for everyone to go check out John's website and all of the stuff that we're showing so you guys can look at it. But essentially, can you see that, John, well enough to read it?
On my
Oh,
screen,
oh,
it's
hang
just
on, hang
you and
on,
I.
hang
No
on.
worries.
Yeah.
I
There we go.
yeah, and I can pull it up on my side too, but I think I could
I
follow
figured I'd
along with
have
you.
you read these. We'll go, but each one here and kind of go through the timeline.
Yeah, I will read from my website, so forgive my eye
Yeah,
line here, but, yeah, I'm happy to read that to you. You want the whole timeline
yeah.
the
Let's go
condensed
through all of them.
version that I put in the
Yeah,
article?
that you did exactly. Yeah, it's
Sure.
great.
Sure, sure. June 8th through the 13th, 2023. Initial contact was made with known associates of Grusch, urging them to have him speak with AARO. These efforts were clarified during dialogues between AARO's director and individuals close to Grusch. June 26, 2023, AARO staff reached out directly for Grusch's contact details and extended an interview invitation, which Grusch declined. June 28th, after Grusch's congressional testimony, AARO sought any verifiable information he might have shared with Congress. July 27, 2023, further attempts to arrange an interview through another associate of Grusch who was meeting him the following day. October 6, 2023, a secure call was made to encourage Grusch to participate in a formal interview. November 10th, 2023, Grusch agreed to be interviewed on November 14th after congressional staff urged his cooperation. November 14th, Grusch failed to appear at the scheduled interview, expressing doubts about AARO's authorization to handle classified information. November 19th, AARO contacted Grusch again, reiterating their authorization and inviting him to discuss his claims, which he declined. January 8th of this year, 2024, AARO provided additional documentation to address Grusch's concerns about confidentiality and classification handling, maintaining a standing invitation for an interview. That was where these documents have left off.
Yeah, and you can see right here, again, all of that is in the document on John's website, so please go check that out. You can see everything he's referencing in that sort of timeline that he made. And quickly, you kind of pointed this out right here. This is the person that was meeting Grusch on November 14th, emailing Grusch at 10:34 a.m. saying, "I've been waiting in the lobby over 30 minutes. Are you showing up?" Because they had a 10 a.m. appointment to meet. And from what I can gather from quickly going through the documents before our interview, John, the big crux of this sort of dilemma between AARO and Grusch was really Grusch's questions about, is AARO allowed to accept the information that I want to tell them? Are they legally allowed to? And that was the back and forth. Grusch asking questions, them answering, saying, no, we are legally allowed. Here's proof. Here's this, here's that. And Grusch, either for whatever reason, that's not enough for him, his standard, I don't know, whatever. It seemed like some miscommunication and misunderstanding. And to be fair to Grusch, Grusch did apologize for not showing up to that meeting. I do want to make sure that I read that as well. He did say, thank you, or I apologize for the confusion this morning about my whereabouts. I should have been more clear in my email on Monday. Because again, from what I could tell, that's what was holding up. He felt like, yes, I agreed to come in at 10 a.m. on this date, but I asked some questions, and in his mind, those questions didn't get answered. So therefore, that's why he didn't show up to that meeting and I guess didn't know it was confirmed, or however. Yeah, right. What do you think? Am I steel manning that right? Am I sort of explaining
I
that
think
correctly?
you're absolutely right. I made sure that his apology was in the article, and I made reference to that. I believe just from a professional courtesy standpoint, I'm glad that he did that. Little
100%.
surprised though that it went so far as to it being scheduled. Something like
I
this
agree.
just isn't, a lunch date between buddies, but rather something pretty important. And it went right
Yeah.
down to the wire where these guys are sitting in the lobby for 30 minutes. So I'm kind of surprised at that. And I was also stressed, in the interest of fairness to David Grusch, that this really comes down to the exact timeline of how everything unfolded. That what someone says on a Monday could absolutely be a different answer if something else happens that next Tuesday. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't want to just immediately jump on him and say, "Aha, he's lying." It's much more complicated than that. But I will say, just in the initial, because this is so new as we're recording this, just kind of in the initial unfolding of this with the general public. And now, you go to David Grusch's associates like Jeremy Corbell, who does interviews and makes these pretty big accusations against Kirkpatrick lying and that there was no invitation and this and that. Those definitely, from what I've seen, have come after these invitations were sent, or these attempts to contact Grusch were sent. So I think we have to really be fair to the timeline, and in the same respect, be fair to the facts here on when this all unfolded. But I will say, what we've been told by David Grusch and close associates to him through these various YouTube channels and podcasts that they do doesn't look like it's 100% accurate. And I think, with that being said, and now we have the documents, I will reiterate, I don't think the FOIA is the end all be all, and this is gospel, but I will say this is a very important pile of evidence now. So if somebody wants to counter that, if somebody wants to come and dispute any of this, do it. I will be the first to publish an updated article and put those statements out there. I didn't attempt to contact David Grusch again, because I've done so numerous times in the past through his attorney, known associates, and so on. And each and every one was ignored. So I just don't find it, beneficial to anybody anymore to continue to try and do it. If he wants to address these things, I really hope that he does. If his associates that have made major claims about how all this have unfolded, I hope they do. I hope mainstream media that reports on David Grusch's story, I hope they look at this and go, okay, let's ask some more questions. Because look, if AARO's lying and they're fabricating and this is all a big game of charades, let's hear it. Those are things that we need to hear. And I hope people with more of a reach than me will look at this and go, okay, let's build off of it. That's why I write these articles. Because again, I make them open-ended. I think there are ways to keep moving this forward, but the players involved have to play ball. And a lot of times they don't want to. They stay in a very close, tight niche bubble, and only associate with those that don't ask these types of questions. And I don't want to name names, but there are journalists out there that cover this. Why aren't they filing FOIAs that I've seen? Why aren't they coming out with documents? It's too early to tell if they'll cover this. So I'm not going to make, any accusations. This is so fresh. I don't expect anybody to have a story out on this yet. But if they don't, you have to ask why. Why aren't they pushing stuff like this? Even if they did come to the determination that AARO is lying through their teeth, that's fine. But I think that these pieces of evidence need to be addressed. You had brought up the conversation about whether or not AARO would be cleared to hear what David Grusch has to offer. Now, I'm no attorney, so my friendly caveat here is that this isn't legal advice for anybody, but I do believe with high confidence that this is accurate. When you have an official DoD statement that has come out, and this is verifiable, that
Just if I could pull it up real quick here. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Is this it?
No, it's not in the batch of documents. So I'm speaking to a statement that Susan Goff, which I know gets a lot of heat from people in the UFO community. It doesn't matter who said it, Susan Goff or not. It is an official statement by the U.S. Department of Defense. And essentially what they stated was that AARO was cleared to receive information under Title 10 and Title 50 umbrellas, meaning they were cleared to hear this. Now, there was some legal nitty-gritty that came after that, but and what that involved was essentially them going to the CIA, meaning AARO going to the CIA and pressing for information that may touch on a non-UAP related SAP or something like that. That gets into a much different conversation. But when it comes to David Grusch and or whomever else, when it comes to Title 10 or Title 50 related information, that could be conveyed to AARO with no problem. Now, that was just one statement. So it's like, well, how do we know that this is real? Well, in this batch of documents, now back to the packet that you have on your screen, towards the end are two memos, one of which is from a major general who is the director of SAPCO. I'm going to pull it up here myself because I don't have it up. But the director of
this one
SAPCO,
right here,
yeah,
or the next one.
There's two of them. The very last.
There's two of them, yeah.
Yep. I'll deal with the very last page first, the one on your screen there. That is signed by Major General David Abba. He's the director of the DoD Special Access Program, Central Office, or SAPCO. Essentially, they are saying that whomever has an NDA security clearance all the way up to top secret, if there is this UAP related information that AARO needs, they are cleared to give it. Now, above that is what seems to be an identical memo, but it's not. It's very, very similar. This one was from CAPCO within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. This is yet again reiterating that AARO had the ability to hear this information, receive this information. You can see down the crossed out portion where it says top secret / SCI or SAP. That was where some of the language differed from the first letter that I went over. Point being is that now we have ODNI and the DoD in their SAPCO office saying, yes, AARO can receive everything. And if you look at the second paragraph, I think it is from memory, it specifically addresses non-disclosure agreements, and that essentially any U.S. government non-disclosure agreement that they are subjected to, it didn't matter that AARO was still authorized. Now, a lot of this is boring language, nitty gritty. What's the bottom line? AARO was cleared to receive the information. And where I said I wasn't an attorney and this wasn't legal advice, what I say with high confidence is that anybody with legal background will agree that an attorney, a real attorney, would look at these statements, the DoD statement, the SAPCO letter, and the one from ODNI. And they would look at all of that. And then if one of their clients went into AARO, gave them information, and then they got in trouble, they would have a field day with this. There is no way with these three pieces of official evidence that's verifiable now by anybody, that somebody goes into AARO and shares that UAP related information, and they all of a sudden get repercussions from that. I don't see it. Any lawyer would have a field day. This is black and white, specifically addressing NDAs. You hear a lot of people banter about this online. Well, those NDAs, they can't go against that, and AARO didn't show the proper clearance. This is that proper clearance. You can't get more specific than this. And so I get fired up when people have that argument on behalf of David Grusch, just
Yeah.
simply because it's black and white now. FOIA brought this out. If they want to dispute these letters and say, well, FOIA is useless because this is all made up, fine. And by the way, people, yes, they do that. I get accused of posting hoax documents and stuff like that
Oh, wow.
quite more often than you would think, even though they
Well,
can verify it themselves. But
sure.
regardless, if you're going to make that accusation against me, the government, or both, you got to prove it, right? You can't just make the accusation, go, well, none of this means anything. No, it means an awful lot. There are 3 verifiable pieces of evidence now that support that David Grusch would be absolutely cleared to go in there. Now, not to get too nitty gritty, there may be portions, maybe, if he is talking about non-UAP related SAPs on a Title 50 level, that maybe you could maybe make a case that he wouldn't be legally allowed to tell AARO. Again, not being a lawyer, but I read all this and go, yeah, maybe, but I highly doubt it. I really do. But if that were true, let's just operate off the assumption that there is a portion. There is still a pile of evidence that I believe, just based on David Grush's testimony, that he could still pass on to AARO that likely would not impede on that non-UAP related SAP. Or did all 40 witnesses all root to some CIA SAP that would fit in that gray area? To me, I'm sorry, I doubt it. So I think that people are overcomplicating this, and I think that with that said, we have to ask, why are they overcomplicating it? Because it's too easy now. It's too easy to prove that David Grusch can go in there. No one that went in there that was associated with Grusch, because we did learn from Kirkpatrick that some of them did, no one got in trouble, at least not any, and I would imagine if they did, we'd hear about it. So
Sure.
this information is being shared and by others, and there's no repercussions. So why David Grusch is so reluctant to do it, even when Congress itself, who's championed David Grusch, right? I mean, there's part of Congress that has championed his story, that have shown no doubt, that won him in front of a congressional committee under oath. So you can't say that they're part of this conspiracy too. So if they are encouraging him to do this, why doesn't he do it? And that's an unanswered question. I hope we get the answer to someday.
Well, look, let me play devil's advocate
Mhm.
since, right, you gave that side. I mean, David Grush isn't here, so I'll pretend to sort of maybe
Sure.
try to understand maybe his mindset. Again, I don't know. I'm not speaking for him by no means. I agree with a lot of what you said there. Um, but let's assume, you know, again, just miscommunication, even though he's getting that from, representatives of AARO, that's still not enough for him. In his mind, my investigation, I whistle blew, I testified, like this is more important. I need to be absolutely certain, not some assistant to AARO is emailing me saying, meet me in the lobby at some play. And he's thinking, no. This needs, I need more confirmation than just this. You need, because I could tell from some of those documents that Grush was asking for more
Mhm.
information and through Mellon and stuff, and they were kind of going around about. So maybe there's something there. And let's say point number 2 would be maybe Grush just doesn't respect AARO at all,
Mhm.
period, which I can understand to some extent. I don't know if AARO collected evidence or did interviews with people in all the right way 100%. Now, that could be a whole nother podcast on its own of what you
Mhm.
think of that. But just from his mindset, maybe, that's happening. And there's some proof of that in some of these messages in the documents released where someone on behalf of Grush is reaching out to Kirk. I don't think it's Kirkpatrick, but somebody somewhere in there, it's like, oh, they have bad blood. David
Yeah.
Grush does not really, he's got bad blood with Sean. So maybe there's some personal sort of, I don't want to use the word vendetta, but personal, you know, wall up that's keeping him from, you know what? I'm not throwing this guy this bone. I tried, something and whatever. I'm not. Maybe, again, I'm just playing devil's advocate
Mhm.
here, but it's been said that there's this like other, line of leadership above Kirkpatrick, this secret sort of group that's really pulling the strings of AARO. And maybe in Grusch's mind, he's thinking, well, why am I going to go to the people I'm trying to out here in my investigation? Why am I going to go tell them what my investigation is? Again, I don't know if David Grusch is thinking that. I'm just playing devil's advocate, and I'm just throwing out different ideas, but it is fascinating to say the least. At the end of the day, does it matter if Grusch gives his testimony to AARO? I personally don't think so. I don't think it really matters. But I get the whole conversation about it because what it uncovers, right? Any information is good information, and there's a lot in this. Which, as soon as you give, I'm going to let you give your response, and then we're going to jump into those messages, so
Mhm.
everyone knows we are going to jump into those signal messages. But yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say it absolutely is important. And the reason is that AARO is a congressionally mandated effort that's funded to get to the bottom of this. And their position, what their conclusions are, what their updates are essentially the position of the United States government. So what Kirkpatrick says after he left AARO, that's all his personal opinion. That's not with the weight of the US government. AARO's position is. So when they publish reports and they publish all that, and they make these statements like there's no evidence to support non-human intelligence and so on and so forth, that is an official position statement by the US government. So when you take that into consideration, yes, Grusch's testimony to AARO is paramount because that is the arm that Congress is relying on, and the United States government, away from our lawmakers, are relying on to come up with an answer. Now, if there is a conspiracy slash cover up, which to a point I believe there is, then if David Grusch goes in there and he lays it all out there, and then AARO comes out with a report almost identical to what they did, and they said, we talked to David Grusch and we couldn't verify anything. If that is a lie, then yes, I believe that there are protections that David Grusch would have to go back to Congress and go, this is a complete lie. This is nonsense. The evidence that I gave, whatever that was, completely negates what they are telling the American people. And I believe if that were provable and that played out that way, that you would have 30 times the number of congressmen and senators that are currently talking about UAP and that are actively engaged in the conversation. You'd have that ballooned by 30 times more, simply because now lawmakers have the ability to throw this back at the government with evidence and say what you are telling the American people is a lie. They do that every day with the different, and not just on UAP. Well, I'm talking about more broadly. So lawmakers want to expose stuff like this. I don't believe that there would be repercussions on something like this if it were to play out that way. So for him to be reluctant to tell his story, who does he want to tell it to? Because the argument was made prior to the release of these documents. It was all about clearance. Okay, I actually believe part of that. And I believe even after I got these documents that AARO may not have access to everything that they want, but that doesn't mean they can't receive it. I think I've seen enough proof that if David Grusch has something to say or show, that AARO is cleared to receive it.
Yeah.
And yet that's being ignored. And that's
Huh.
why I believe that this is something that's important. But then if he really just doesn't trust Kirkpatrick, well, Kirkpatrick's out. So what's wrong with the current acting
No,
director, Tim
that's a good
Phillips,
point.
right?
Yeah,
So
that's a great point.
what happened there? Will that change? I don't know. So now is it about Kirkpatrick or is it about the organization? Well, okay, if it's the organization, then who do you want to talk to? The
Sure.
president? Like, does this have to be in
Yeah.
the Oval Office or nothing else? So I think that has to be put out there at this point. There's too much to throw into question the excuses that have been made. And I'm not saying that as harshly as it may have come out, but that's all we've heard is excuses on why AARO doesn't have this. So now the government has put their position out. So we need to counter that, or this is just going to die. It's just going to continue to die. And
Yeah.
how the next piece is moved on the chessboard in this game, I don't know. I have no idea what that will be, but I'm very eager to see because these documents, it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and we'll see if they actually address it.
Yeah, you're right. Well said, my man. All right. So again, I'm not gonna lie. When I was flipping through the document and I saw this, I was just like, "What?"
Yeah,
Like I brought up again, like signal messages. Chris Mellon and this is right. Let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. This is Chris Mellon and Sean Kirkpatrick having a signal message, right? Like going back and forth on signal, right?
correct.
And Sean Kirkpatrick is in blue, and Chris Mellon is in dark gray here.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I found some of these messages to be quite fascinating. I wanted to read a few of them here. This again is from Sean Kirkpatrick to Chris Mellon. Grusch has made claims that he's contacted us and we've never responded. That's just not true. He's also made claims that we don't have access to investigate his claims. That's also not true. If I recall correctly, you indicated he refused to come talk with us, and you're quoted as suggesting as such. I'd suggest you emphasize the need to come speak with us. You have the contact email. So it sounds like Chris Mellon is working as an intermediary, right, for Grusch and Kirkpatrick. And that was on Monday, June 12th. I'm assuming this is 2023.
Correct.
Okay. And so a day later, Chris Mellon responds, "Hi, Sean. Do you have a specific example of Dave claiming he's contacted AARO and your office refused to respond? That sounds strange, as during a conversation yesterday, he told me AARO was not a lawfully designated recipient of his whistleblower info, hence his reason for not contacting AARO. I also do not recall saying Dave refused to come talk to AARO. I certainly did not do so in the debrief article or my article in Political, and I've done no interviews yet about Dave." And then Sean responds, "It was on the interview Sunday. Pentagon is preparing a response. His assertion that we aren't lawfully empowered is clearly incongruence with the law." So this is before he testified before Congress. This is just after the News Nation interview broke with Ross Coulthart, right? That's what he's referring. Because in that interview, David Grusch does say that. He does say that Sean Kirkpatrick's got my number. Why hasn't he called me? Essentially. Were there any messages in here that you thought were, because there's a lot to read, were there any in here that you thought were worth pointing out, John?
Yeah, I mean, you went over some good ones there, and then I pulled up. I have a timeline made. I can send you this link so you have it. And as we're recording this, I still haven't put what just came through this, but I have made this gigantic timeline of everything that's happened, like during the OSAP ATIP years and then the post 2017 years, and it really helps me in times like now to kind of cross reference. The interview on News Nation was June 11th, 2023. That's in the timeline here. And point being is that is what, just confirming what you kind of assumed was right. You're absolutely right. That's the News Nation interview. That was June 11th, 2023. And obviously we get, various interviews through other podcasts and stuff like that from David Grusch. So one of the things that I think the next step is for me to kind of address some of these text messages, because I was surprised Mr. Mellon was saying, "Oh, like, where is an example of this?"
Totally.
That was kind of like common knowledge that that's what he was saying. So I was a little surprised at that, that he was reluctant to agree with it. And that is one thing. Let me go through some of the others.
Maybe he hadn't seen the News Nation interview, as crazy as that is. Maybe Chris Mellon hadn't seen that yet.
I'd be surprised, but
that he said that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. One of the other ones I know that Mellon had said that he wasn't essentially saying, I have to find it here, but essentially wasn't necessarily saying that David Grusch was being accurate, but rather he felt he was sincere and genuine. I had put that in the article itself that I wrote. So you kind of see a little bit of behind the scenes of how Christopher Mellon was feeling about David Grusch's story. And to be honest with you, that very much aligns with how I view it. I do believe, and I've said this so many times since he's come around, I don't get the feeling he's maliciously lying. I really don't. I mean, even after these
Dave
documents.
Grusch, right?
Yeah, I
Or who
really
you
don't
said?
get
Yeah.
that impression that he's
No,
being
no,
malicious.
I don't either, man. To be fair, like to David Grusch, my whole thing with Grusch is in my mind, he has given us a treasure map to go. Like, here's the places, here's the name. Like, until somebody says we went to those places, this isn't real. This is his investigation is bullshit, which I just haven't heard that yet from anybody. I get that there's these issues with AARO and going in and Title 50 and all this stuff. And most people, let's be real, 99% of people don't care about any of that. They don't even know what
Yeah.
that means. They don't care. They don't know. Like, what's happening? Is David Grusch's claims real or not? What is happening with that? Because he kind of opened this can of worms, and then it's like, well, what's happening now? What is happening with David Grusch and his claims? Like, who's picking up the torch, essentially? Like, who's running with this? Like, what are we doing about it? I know they had a skiff where they sort of mentioned the non-UAP related claims that Grusch had made seemed verifiable or validated or whatever the actual term that was used, right? But not the fantastical parts of his story. That has yet to be validated. And like, what's happening with that? That's all I'm waiting for. I think Grusch seems like a genuine guy, and I'm just waiting for that. Like, when is that going to happen? Like, what are we doing? Is he testifying again? Are they going to go to these places? Are they going to talk to all these 40 whistleblowers? What is happening?
Well,
right?
that's kind of the double-edged sword here. And what happens next is there is talk and rumor of a more another at least one more public hearing. We know that there was a
Yeah.
classified briefing recently, which happened to be with not only Tim Phillips but the director of DoD SAPCO. So we obviously are seeing traction there of some kind. But if you want congressional interest, and congressional interest spawns AARO, and then you won't talk to AARO, there's kind of an issue here. It's like, okay, you've gotten what you wanted. So now you don't trust Kirkpatrick. And prior to the end of 2023, everybody was saying Kirkpatrick this, Kirkpatrick that. Fine. And it all rooted to Kirkpatrick. But as I just said not too long ago, he's gone now. So what's the
He's
issue?
gone.
Right.
That's a good
So
point.
are
I
we
agree.
really saying that AARO is tainted? Okay, fine. Then prove to Congress AARO is tainted. That the very thing that they funded is having money wasted due to a cover-up. And I'll be the first to say, I would buy that. If somebody could prove it, I'd be like, yeah, let's bring it out. I have no problems writing about it, profiling it, and putting it out there. But you can't make the accusation and just go, I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't trust anybody. Well, this is what everybody wanted, even in these text messages. And that's another part here where Kirkpatrick and Mellon go back and forth. Kirkpatrick says, you are defending and adjudicating, and you're undermining the very organization you purported to help establish for this purpose. That is an incredibly powerful thing to say to someone like Mr. Mellon, coming from someone like Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick in a private signal communication back and forth. And to be honest with you, it's a great point. It's like, what is going on? Now, Mr. Mellon had essentially refuted that, and he says that he's trying to bring everybody to AARO. So with that said, that mid of last year, it looks like Mr. Mellon trusted AARO enough to take the people that he knew and said, hey, go to AARO. So I think that's wonderful insight there. One minor note, I don't know if you have it on your screen there on that. It's on the screenshot of the article itself. But anyway, there's if anybody uses Signal, if somebody sends you a long message, there is
it
text
says,
at the bottom that says read more. You can see it's truncated. So there's actually more. So I've filed an appeal to get the more. And I actually believe that there's more than what was released to me. But
I don't know if they
later.
have it. Let's be real. I'll be honest. I don't think they have it, because for them to get those screenshots, you have to have the original message. You have to hit read more and then get that screenshot, which they probably didn't do. They probably asked Chris Mellon or Kirkpatrick to send in these, and he didn't realize that when he was going through. Right. And so he didn't hit read more on that screenshot. If he still, I bet they would have to have Sean Kirkpatrick go back through his signal messages, open that up again, hit the read more button, have it come up, and then send that additional screenshot in. But my guess is they don't have it. Otherwise, they would have sent it to you, right?
Well, yes and no.
But who knows?
I have proven cases where they've made mistakes.
They left something off.
And so that's just a mistake. Now, in the documents, go to there's one that I want to point out to you because
let me find that read more. This is what we're talking about.
This is the last. Yeah, it's going to be the last signal message that's on there.
Got it.
That's it
right here.
above, right? Okay. Look above where it says today and below where it says yesterday. It says you set disappearing message time to 1 week. What that means is that every message from there on out was going to be deleted on Signal after 1 week. Now, government
is that? Who
that's Sean. It says you.
That's
and
Sean?
That would be
These
right.
are Sean's
Signal
messages.
Blue,
Got it.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay.
So he set that. Now I want to know why, because to your point about they probably don't have it. You're likely right, but there are things called record retention schedules within every federal agency. And what record retention schedules are is that they're mandated in writing, black and white procedures and policy that prove for a certain amount of time, documents need to be withheld. Sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's in perpetuity or forever. And what I proved with Luis Elizondo's emails, this was a big story. He even used it in his IG complaint. They went beyond those record retention schedules. And I was able to prove beyond any doubt, nobody could dispute it on the DoD side. And I worked on this story for months, that they went against their own record retention schedule and deleted Luis Elizondo's emails. And the repercussion from that was obviously you lose all of that history. So what did we lose deleting all of that? Well, put a pin in that for now. Go back to these text messages. I don't know off the top of my head what the record retention schedule is, if anything, when it comes to text messages sent by the US government. But I can say, away from the UFO arena, talking broadly, there are numerous FOIA cases that have brought out text message exchanges as evidence. So, and what they're considered as a responsive document. Sometimes it's in FOIA court cases. Other times they're subpoenaed and brought into litigation cases, FOIA and otherwise. Point being, there's a retention schedule for these as well. So hopefully that data is saved. But when you automatically delete and destroy things after a week, that brings up another question. If the records retention schedule says that you have to save certain things for X amount of months, years, or decades, then you have to do that. You can't start deleting things just because you want to. So it's a really interesting gray area. Now, why I said put a pin in that other story, because since I wrote that, and I don't talk about this a lot because I'm still working on it, but just to throw it out there to you, because I never let things go. The DoD discovered after I published my story, I was told that it made waves within the Pentagon because it was largely a very unacknowledged issue that the DoD was having. And then and I have to speak a little bit more generally here, but this will come out in the course of time here. But there were multiple agencies involved because Luis Elizondo's emails were likely not the only one. And when you have these records retention schedules, they are incredibly important to follow. And places like the National Archives get involved because they mandate the essential retention of these records. But on top of that, then they're on the receiving end once they're archived. Some are destroyed after 5 or 7 or 10 years, and that's okay. But what I was able to deduce with Elizondo's was that it was at least a couple of years too soon. That's a big problem. And NARA got involved, from what I understand. I believe DISA got involved, which is the Defense Information System Agency. But point being here is that multiple agencies then were kind of alerted to this issue and things started to happen. So that story is far from over. And I know that a lot of people thought it was specific to Luis Elizondo, myself included. But again, I
Yeah.
don't let stories go. I will keep pushing and pushing and pushing until I can't push no more. And I'm definitely not done on that story. And it likely will more of that will come out soon.
No, that's I mean, that's fascinating, to be honest with you. Yeah, because there's two. I just saw another read more, right? So there's two of them,
Yeah.
two parts where there's more information. You know, how much is it? Is it one word? Is it just another sentence?
Yeah.
Who knows, right? Yeah, that is interesting. Because is Sean Kirkpatrick immediately screenshotting the messages? Like, he gets them and he gets the conversation and he's immediately screenshotting, or was it upon request that he goes back? He can't, if that can't be the case, because if he's setting them to disappear within a week and only after halfway through the conversation, right? That's interesting. That's weird. I don't
Well,
know.
we don't know halfway. If you go to the beginning, this is another thing.
Well, that's
You
a good
always look for
point.
the little smallest things.
Yeah.
When you look at the top of the messages, Sunday, June 11th says thanks. Now that's
Yeah,
from Mr.
exactly.
Mellon
Correct.
to
What does that
Dr. Sean.
mean?
What does
Where's the
that
rest
mean?
of that?
And what is it responding to? So
Thanks to
what
what?
was released here is considered a responsive record pertaining to my request. And that request was for all information regarding the invitations to David Grusch to go speak with AARO. That was the scope. They
Correct.
call that a scope. So the
Got
scope
it.
of the request was that.
Anything in
But where did
relation to that?
screenshots come from? And that's the question mark that I don't have an answer to yet. But whether or not the records retention schedules mandate the retention of these text messages, or when they created the memorandum for the record, they created their attachments, and Kirkpatrick then went to his government issued phone on his Signal app, took these screenshots for the memorandum for record, but didn't
Correct.
save anything else because there's no mandate for it. So that is a
Correct.
possibility too, that the records retention schedule could just be non-existent for Signal messages.
Sure.
And if that's true, that is a bigger issue also, because you're using a government issued phone with a third party app, albeit encrypted, doing government work, but circumventing retention laws. Oh, that's a whole different story in itself. So, that's jumping the gun a little bit. We don't know the answers to this stuff yet, but it is a very fascinating thing for me to see, just simply because I'm such a geek with those schedules, because it goes to the heart of why I do what I do, and that's the preservation of all of this.
You're looking at the details too.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the details right now and I'm thinking to myself, okay, he's on Wi-Fi, so he's clearly at his home or office, right? I don't know what this little symbol is. That looks like a car, doesn't it? Is that like when you connect to your car?
I'm trying to see what you're pointing
know?
at. Forgive
It's
me
like
here.
a little
Where are you?
up here by the top right of the message, right where he's got it. He's using an Android phone.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't know. That's interesting, right? And you see these three little dots at the very top of that first message. Like, what is that from?
Yeah, that would be the message above. I think you can see above that thanks, you can see kind of the blue. It even looks like it maybe was digitally altered.
Oh, you're right. Actually, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you know what?
To me,
They did add this blur. They did. Yeah. They totally did.
That's why I'm telling you, I get so much heat from people. Why do you care about the little details? That's why.
I agree, man. That
because
shit matters.
that in itself, not only the read more, but that blur at the top and those three dots indicate that there are other messages, plus the common sense. You look at thanks. What is he saying?
Correct.
Thanks to?
Yeah. Thanks to what?
That spawns another case. I can tell you right there.
Nobody starts a conversation with thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks. What? And he's got him as a contact, Chris Mellon, right in there. Now, typically, if you put in a number into Signal, I've used it a little bit. It can bring it up, but you kind of got to add them. So yeah, were they having other conversations prior to this? Was it only about this and Grusch? And why does David Grusch need an intermediary? Why can't he have his own personal connection like all the other witnesses that were reaching out to AARO and giving testimony? And they were also talking about things that David Grusch has brought up. Like, there's nothing that's in David Grusch's investigation, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know the full scope of it, but I don't think there's anything in Grusch's investigation that other people who went to AARO and testified said, right? They said the same stuff. There's a secret group, UFO reverse engineering, crashed UFOs. We got bodies, they're telling their own stories. How is any of that different from what Grusch is going to say? What bombshell is Grusch dropping that isn't in some of the other testimony that happened? I think really at the end of the day, Grusch just didn't like Sean Kirkpatrick, didn't like the way AARO was approaching the investigation. Yeah, I think we also have to keep in mind Grusch was part of the UAPTF, right? So he was essentially part of an AARO as well back in the day, and that's what his investigation is from. Maybe there's some just you know what I mean? It's like the other team. It's like, oh, I'm not giving them my work that I did. I don't know. Again, this is all speculation. I don't know, but I think you made a great point, essentially, to sum all this up before we move on to KONA Blue here, is that the full story is not out there, and this helps fill in a lot of blanks about the misconception of Grusch and AARO and what was holding them back. What was the wall in between them that was holding it back? It sounds like a lot of that was answered for Grusch, and why didn't Grusch go in if his questions were being answered? So yeah, it leaves a lot open, man. No, great job on this. Great
appreciate
job.
it. And if I can add just one closing thought before you move on to that, because now, generally speaking, more broadly speaking, when it comes to Grusch's story, one of the biggest issues and questions I've had roots to why he's been allowed to say what he's said in the general public, and that roots to his Dopser review. And I've kind of beat this horse, but there's a reason I keep beating it, in that what Dopser is, for those that don't know, is that if you're current or former DoD, you have to go through the Dopser process when you're going to publish something, manuscript, a book, even if it's fiction. They need to review it to ensure that the classified knowledge that you have is not secretly woven into the pages or just outright stated. And that Dopser review process takes in a batch of material, whatever that is, again, book, manuscript, movie script, whatever. In David Grusch's case, it was a list of questions that he was being asked, and he was going to give answers. Now, we are led to believe that Dopser signed off on him talking about non-human intelligence, biologics, or the bodies or the pilots of these craft, and really the overview, the broad strokes of these programs. Now, if anybody knows anything about government secrecy, you can't talk about certain things of a classified program, because just broadly describing them is classified in nature. I use the stealth fighter example. Even though you don't say the F-117, or I think it was called Senior Trend, or I forget what senior program it was, but even if you talk about the designator before the general public was ever made aware of it, you can't go out and start broadly speaking about stealth technology, evading radar, and that we're building these things. Why? Because it's inherently classified. The scope of these programs, even though you're not naming them, is classified in nature. So the fact that Dopser signed off on it was always a red flag to me. But the bigger red flag is that David Grusch will not show what Dopser approved for him to talk about. So we have to rely on News Nation interviews and YouTube podcasts and YouTube shows and so on, that what he has done. And we all have to assume what he had in there was in the Dopser review. But he's approved to show it. That's the whole point of the Dopser process. Pre-publication review. There's a reason why pre-publication review is in the name of Dopser. And it's because if you're going to publish something, they need to review it first. They approved it. I got all of the communications internally through FOIA regarding that, but they redact what David Grusch submitted to them, not because it was classified, but rather it was something proprietary. It was his words. It was not a government document. So that's understandable. I don't like it, but the redaction was understandable. But that doesn't mean David Grusch can't turn around and release it, and he refuses to do so. I've spoken to a couple of his colleagues, very close associates, that have direct contact with him, and I said, why, there's no reason, but if you can give me a good reason, I'll publish it. Because I've written about this in articles, I've done various YouTube videos on it, because it is an important piece. He won't do it. So I think that on top of all of this is a red flag, because sure, if you don't like Kirkpatrick, you don't want to share your classified details, fine. Okay, let's just get beyond that for a moment. The DoD has approved you to talk about certain things in the general public sphere, and you submitted to them points X, Y, and Z that you wanted to talk about. We can only assume that that's what you are talking about. But why isn't he showing it? And that to me is a big red flag that not many people talk about. But when you add that to this, something is up. There's something up with him not wanting to share the information he has, even though he's being handed on a silver platter, going back to that SAPCO letter, and the Capco one, and the DoD position statement that they submitted. Those three things, that's a silver platter for anybody who wants to go share information, and he won't do it. Adopter approval, a 100% approval. They never, on that first review, omitted anything. They allowed him to say everything that he had in that document. He was free to publish and has been free to publish since they did that.
Well, what do you think could be some, let's just try to think from his mindset, like what could be some legitimate reasons not to release that?
Prior to his congressional testimony, I felt that would be the only reason, that he was keeping an approved DoD piece of information, a nugget, if you will. He was keeping that to himself to reveal that to Congress for the first time, to add legitimacy to it, that it was under oath. I could buy that. I wouldn't agree with it, but I would fine. I would accept that. Is the more proper way to say that. He's testified now under oath. So is he still withholding information that the DoD has stamped their approval on? I would hope not. So if he is, so there's a couple ways to look at this. He's still withholding information. Why? The DoD says he can talk about it. There's no legal ramifications whatsoever. People have tried to make that argument with me.
Maybe he has personal reasons. I mean, again, I'm not speaking for
what
Grusch,
are
but
they? Well, I'll throw the question back at you.
What
if he wants to be the UFO whistleblower, which he has been labeled, if
why
that's
not
what he
release
wants,
it all?
blow the whistle.
Yeah.
And he's approved to do
sure.
it. I'm not saying release secret CIA SAP details. I'm saying just release what the DoD said you can release, and we'll go from there. But there's none. So from a personal,
I'd be curious to hear his response. I'd be curious to hear his response. Yeah, I mean, right? Yeah, I'd be curious to hear. Hey, this is why I'm not releasing. You know, there's this, there's that. I definitely have learned in life, you know, that sometimes things on the surface seem one way, but once you hear the full story, like, okay, that makes sense. I get it, you know. And I have found Grusch to, out of a lot of questionable people in this community, I have found Grusch to just seem genuine. I'm not saying that what he's saying is true. Okay. I'm definitely not saying that. I believe he believes it to be true. And I find him genuine. So that's why I'd be curious to hear his answer of why he did it. I mean, he probably has a good reason. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe you're right. Like, why not release that? Why not let us see if you've made your investigation somewhat public to an extent? You've testified, you're wanting to be this whistleblower, like you said, and he has said multiple times in public, I want to help us, you know, lead us to disclosure, and I'll do this thing for us. And so I get your point. I totally understand your frustration. You're not alone. I know people are going to be commenting in the comments here of this video, and they agree with you. They're going to say the same thing. Like, yes, what's going on? What is he hiding? What are we waiting for? It kind of goes to the point we were talking about earlier of Grusch, like what's happening with this whole thing. It's like, that's what happens in the UFO community. Things pop out and then it's like they bring out the cake, but they never serve it. Ever. And they just keep bringing out cakes, but we never get a slice of it. So we don't know what's going on. Like, where'd the cake go? What's happening with Grusch? What's happening with everything, with everybody? I don't know. There's no like place to go to get that information. Like, this is what's coming up next. This is what we have on the agenda. This is what the timeline is for Grusch. Like, he started a journey, but we don't know where the finish line is. We don't know where this is going.
And that would
where
be
it's
okay.
supposed to go.
I think, and on that point, you're absolutely right. We don't know where we're going, but we're going to be as transparent as possible. Let's do this together. But I'm gung ho, skeptical maybe, but I'm like, I will publish anything you're ready to put out there. You know, I don't like one-sided stories. When I contact Grusch as many times as I have through his attorney multiple times, have tried and just get ignored every time, which is their right to do. I'm not saying they need to respond, but I don't like one side. I want both sides because as you stated, there absolutely is a second side. I know that portions of what I said today, mark my words, will be cut up, clipped, put on X, and I'll be labeled some big bad meaning. But I will say this, I will say that I absolutely 100% agree with you. I've said it in this show, but I've also said it now for quite some time. I believe he's genuine. I believe that he's not lying when he goes under oath, because that's a big thing that people like to tout. Well, he went under oath, he'd be in cuffs if he was lying. Well, not necessarily so. He's conveying what he's heard. He's conveying the information he's taken from those 40 people. We know one of which, who by his own admission was Dr. Eric Davis. He posted that on Facebook. So when you take that into account, if Eric Davis is one of his 40, then you could probably start filling in quite a few other blanks that all surround the same names that we keep hearing, which may be the ones that are not telling him the absolute truth. So even though he's not lying, likely that he's very genuine and that he likely very much believes what he's saying, all of that can be true, but it doesn't take away from the reality that there are other people feeding him bad information that he may not realize are bad actors. That is a big possibility. And that's another thing that I'm really surprised that some people don't consider, simply because when you look at the secrecy behind this, when you look at some of the players behind this, you look at all of that, we're going to all of a sudden start believing the people that tell you what they say, but they won't show you. They're telling what these people want to hear, so they just automatically believe them. That's not good enough here. And I think that David Grusch is very genuine, but we have to look at who his sources are and where he got his information and work backwards.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I always say too, like, this is would be considered the greatest knowledge in human history to find out if this is real or not, right? So, like, we should be asking questions and skeptical, right? You're asking us to accept a reality breaking truth. Yes, I'm going to be probably the most skeptical I've ever been in my life, in fact, because you know what I mean? For us to move past that point, we've got to know for sure and not go off stories. If you know, not for this, hello, we do need evidence. We do need, I often like to remind people that, you know, who are feeling skeptical or, you know, suspicious about certain people in the community, it's okay to feel that way, because think about it this way. David Grusch would also be skeptical. If he was hearing this stuff just from hearing him, and I've even heard him say that before he even got into this, I wasn't really, even though there's been some disagreement on whether or not Grusch was into this way before or whatever. I remember some other stuff about that, but let's just, for instance, say he wasn't, like he has stated. And then one day he hears from a buddy at a bar, oh, I think there's more to this, as Ross Coulthart said. He was also skeptical of this stuff, and he needed evidence. That's why he did the investigation. Now, regardless of what you think he found or what the conclusion of that investigation is, the point is he did the investigation, right? Yeah. That's the whole point. So I think it's okay to feel skeptical, and I think these people equally feel skeptical. I think there's a lot of white noise on Twitter and other places that make you feel that feeling that way is wrong, but in reality, it's not at all. We should be skeptical, asking questions, open-minded to the idea, but skeptical about the details. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever, which is why I enjoy what you do so much. And I think maybe you don't know that you have a lot of respect in the community, man, to be honest with you. Like, you're one of the goats,
I don't know about,
dude,
no,
you know what I mean?
I appreciate that, but I question it sometimes.
Well, that's because probably you base it on what you get on Twitter. But if you were to leave Twitter, the real world, people respect you and like you and love what you're doing, and, you know, and keep doing what you're doing. You have rational, normal, everyday people who look up to what you do. So I promise you, like, it definitely makes an impact. And we need more of that. Anyone pushing any narrative outside of that, to me, is just wanting to cause problems, or I don't know what their personal stuff. I don't care. But this whole idea of, oh, that's bad for disclosure, you're bad for disclosure, you're anti-disclosure. Well, what the hell are we talking about? We're asking questions. We're wanting to dig in. We're looking for the truth, equally as David Grusch, Lou Elizondo, who any of these people are. If we're all truthful and intellectually honest with ourselves, then we're looking for the truth, whatever that is. We're not going to define the truth before we get to it, or have a truth. And how do I get to that truth? What path can I take and move my way around every which way, ignore fact, just go around the tree of facts and just get to my truth. No, no, no. I don't care what the thing is or multiple things are. I'm just curious what it is, whatever that is, a psyop, advanced technology, American technology, Chinese drones, maybe ET, maybe that, right? Like I'm like you, I'm open to it all. I don't know what's going on. I'm fascinated by the evidence that's out there. It's definitely, like you said, enough to keep looking into this and investigating. And, that's where we need to be, which leads me to my next thing, this KONA Blue stuff that came out. Let me bring this up real quick. What did you think about that? Just like right off the bat, like KONA Blue and all that. You've been talking about it for a minute, though.
Yeah, I didn't know. I filed for it back in January for that information. I'm going to bring it up on my screen as well here.
You're the one that got this out, right?
Well, in fairness,
Or no?
it roots to Kirkpatrick, and then I mean, to get really technical, it roots back to Dr. James Lakatsky's book and their recollection of them going to DHS, trying to essentially continue OSAP. Fast forward to about January of this year, Kirkpatrick didn't say KONA Blue. Nobody did up until somewhat recently with the release of that report. But the idea that the OSAP crew went to DHS and got a little bit of traction for them continuing this program. So now, fast forward, that FOIA request that I filed is still open. So this was what they call a proactive release, where we see this sometimes where they don't have a legal standing to release, or excuse me, they don't have a legal standing to withhold something. So sometimes they'll try and release it to have that aura, I should say, of transparency. And I think that that's what this was. But I believe that there's more. So I'm still kind of pushing on the FOIA case, which, as I said, is still open. But what they released,
you think there's more information about KONA Blue, you're saying?
Yeah, but maybe not the proposal. So what they released was more of the proposal, the documents when it came to what they wanted to do. But you don't make those types of approvals and memorandums without there being email exchanges and stuff like that.
Before that.
Yeah. And those are the types of pieces of the puzzle that really fascinate me, because that's kind of the genesis of all of that. Then you get to the proposal, and then there was a big period in between them.
How about the emails afterwards?
That's what I mean.
Right?
And
like
those. So on your screen now is Richard McComb. He obviously was the one that reviewed this material. Well, there's a whole paper trail to the review of this material to ensure that there was nothing in it that was top secret or that should remain so. And what was very interesting about the security markings was the unclassified designator on it.
Yeah, and so you bring that up. I'm glad you brought that up. What are your
why I say that is because because there was potentially nothing top secret about any of this, and that it was unclassified. Now, generally what you see, I say generally because there's always exceptions to the rule, but generally what you see with a declassified top secret document is you do see that declassified by stamp, the authority, and then the date of declassification. But you generally don't see the unclassified designator replacing the top secret one. You're simply changing the top secret designation to a declassified document. In some cases, there's still some information that's redacted that is considered top secret. In most of what you see here, the information was mostly released, but you still had redactions. So I think that there's still some stuff to unravel with that security marking. It gets really nitty-gritty, boring to some people, but in the same respect, I think that it's a pretty
details
interesting
matter. Yeah, I agree.
And I
for
think
you to say that means something. If Joe Schmo, if I said it, I don't know shit, I'm an idiot, that would be different. But you, with your history and your knowledge of these documents, dude, you've seen literally millions of them. I don't know who's the better authority than you, bro. So for you to say that, I pause. I think about it. It makes me think about it for sure. Is there any distinction between, see up here it says declassified, unclassified? Like, are they saying that declassified, it was classified?
Yeah.
We declassified. Is unclassified mean it was never classified to begin with? Or what? Why that difference? Or what? Or am I
Yeah, and there's a couple of this gets into nitty gritty as well, but yeah, I mean that's kind of the weirdness there is that you generally don't see that unclassified stamp, but you would see that declassified by. What you also see is when the document originates, there's an authority to classify documents, so you can't just make it up and say, well, this is top secret. Well, no, you have to have an authority to do so, and you have to have some kind of
Yeah.
you have to have
This
something
is
that
top
falls back.
secret, guys.
Yeah.
That's your lunch order, Paul. I don't care.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
top
care. It's
secret
a
now.
top
Yeah.
secret. So you see that on the bottom left-hand corner. It says classified by, and then it says U/S for S&T. That's the Undersecretary for Science and Technology.
Where am I seeing that? Oh, right here, right?
Yeah, I don't see there you go. Yep. So that is standard, but what is standard is usually a name on there. So a lot of times you'll see the name redacted, but there is no name there. It's just the position.
You're right.
So again, it's
Yep.
kind of like that wonky,
Why-
look, this is a
why
real
do that?
document. I'm not saying that it's not real or anything
Sure.
before people jump on me, but rather
No,
it was just
no.
kind of a little bit wonky the way that they
Yeah.
that they did it. A lot of UAP documents now that classified by, it's not a person or position. You'll actually see the UAP security classification guide that mandates the security or classification behind
Okay.
UAP material. So an
Got it.
SCG is usually what you see there, policy, executive order, whatever pertains. This was the Undersecretary for Science and Technology, which was kind of interesting. And then the declassified by date, that's generally again, generally speaking, but that's usually about 25 years after the document's creation.
Wow.
Let me see. Executive Order 13528 essentially stipulates that after 25 years, things are automatically declassified unless they still meet the criteria for continued.
So this is sooner,
So-
right? Because this is from what, 2008, 2010,
Likely 2011.
or 2011. Okay, got
Yeah.
it. And
So
real quick,
that's when they
I
were-
don't know if we said this real quick. I just want to real quick, just for people that don't understand what KONA Blue is. Right, it was a OSAP, another UFO program that existed during that time. OSAP and /ATIP, I don't know, confusion there. Wanted to create this sub program, KONA Blue. Am I understanding that right? I don't know. You
it was
explain
supposed to
it
be
us.
right. So OSAP was essentially going to be discontinued at DIA. Now,
Okay.
it should be prefaced, it has to be, that no supporting documentation exists that OSAP was supposed to be investigating UAP or anything paranormal at Skinwalker Ranch or operating with boots on the ground on U.S. soil. When you
Got
talk
it.
about a U.S. intelligence agency like the DIA, that's not their purview. If you would have come to me and said that that was done through FBI, okay, I can buy that. I'd be surprised, but that they have the authority to put boots on the ground. But when you talk about a military intelligence arm that's either contracting or putting their own boots, you're getting into some legal area there that doesn't make sense. It's why I've had a problem with OSAP since day one, because when the reports came out, essentially on paper, it supported what the original proposal was. Forward-looking, 40 years into the future, evaluating 12 different categories, including lift, propulsion, and all sorts of stuff when it came to aerospace technology. Essentially, where could our enemies be 40 years from now? That was a brief nutshell of what OSAP was supposed to be. Bass got the contract. They were the only bidder. The one that orchestrated the money was Senator Harry Reid, then Senator of Nevada, which Robert Bigelow was headquartered at. His Bass subsidiary won the contract, and it was said that Bass was set up solely for this contract. When you do the paperwork and follow the paper trail, you see that Bass was set up about 9 months prior to the OSAP bid solicitation ever going out. Essentially, it was kind of set up for Bass. I get a lot of heat for saying that, but all evidence points to that.
I agree.
Harry
That
Reid
makes
wanted
total
to-
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, not a
I
lot of
agree.
people like me for that,
Really?
but that
Okay.
has to be part of the groundwork when we talk about then what came next. 2010 was when they started saying that this had no merit. So in 2009, 2010, they got 10 million and 12 million respectively. That's that $22 million that we heard about in the New York
Got
Times
it.
originally reported. However, it was misattributed to ATIP. Rather, that 22 million went to a contract called OSAP. So around this time, it was said that DIA was essentially going to phase this out. The documentation showed they evaluated those 38, what they called DIRD reports that came in, and absolutely nothing was of value to them. And I also said since day one, it didn't fit into the purview of the DIA, that they were kind of spiraling into these other areas. So
Okay.
a lot of things just on paper were not supporting that public narrative. But at that time, it was learned through Lakatsky, and then again, fast forward through to Kirkpatrick's interview, now these documents, they wanted to continue OSAP, but DIA said, we don't want it. And so what happened was, it was part of it was rumored to go to OSD in the Pentagon, led by Luis Elizondo. Sorry, but right now there's no official evidence to support that, but that's the story. But they tried to continue all of the, call it, more paranormal stuff through DHS in this program called KONA Blue. KONA Blue, the proposal was essentially creating an OSAP, but making it much more expensive. They were looking for tens of millions of dollars, all the way up to then starting to get into $35 to $50 million per year, that would fund all of these types of centers that Bass was going to set up. And it was all surrounding Bass. Now, another thing I got a lot of heat for over the years is saying that, look, money has to be a consideration here. And a lot of people would say, why would a billionaire care about $22 million? But they always dismissed that OSAP was supposed to go through about 5 years. And then after that, what could it spawn? So now you're talking about not 22 million, but likely well over 100 million. Now we have it in black and white. So you see it right there. So fiscal year 2012, 12 million, fiscal year 13, 25 million, fiscal year 14, 35 to 50 million. So do the math and the pattern. You're looking at doubling that budget nearly every fiscal year. And that obviously then gets in a lot of money. Now, I'm not saying this was all money driven, but I'm saying that you have to look at what benefit there was to the great state of Nevada for this to continue. Who spearheaded this SAP? Senator Harry Reid. Senator from the great state of Nevada. So there was a lot of benefit here for one of his donors, Robert Bigelow, to continue this. Not to diminish the quality of the work, but I'm saying money was absolutely an issue. KONA Blue got some traction at DAS. I'm shocked it did. None of that seems like it would be of interest to DHS. So how it got that traction, I don't know. The documents that were released were the official proposal, which was designated top secret. The code word they had on there was KONA Blue. That obviously didn't route to anything. So I'm not sure if they maybe just made up that designator for a proposal. I don't know if that would be standard or not on a PSAP, but regardless, I think that they made up that designator.
Oh, you got to have a cool name. You got to have a cool name to propose for your program. You can't just walk in with program X, although that's kind of cool too.
Although that probably will fly as well, but but then you also had no foreign on there. That just essentially means no foreign nationals can access it. So they were treating this as like a highly classified SAP program, even though it was just essentially a pitch. And they were saying, we can do this. Got some traction with a couple people at DHS, but it was eventually disapproved, meaning that
denied,
I think
right?
They said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to put money in. But I'm surprised it got this far.
I mean, fair point. So it was denied while OSAP / ATIP or whatever was active.
They say funding ran out in 2012 on OSAP. That essentially was,
you said
was
this
when
was
it was
2011. So okay, so
yeah, but there's no indicator that Bass did anything really after 2010. You know, that because they delivered the reports in 2009 and 2012
or open, but
technically,
not maybe no active investigations or work or reporting happening, but it was still technically an active program when KONA Blue got denied. And they probably were like they're probably like, this is our last straw. We tried to get this, it didn't work, and it just sort of fizzled out. That's what it sounds like.
The impression I got was that Lakatsky obviously spearheaded this. I think that he wanted it to continue. I think that he believed in the work.
James Lakatsky.
Dr. James Lakatsky. Yeah. So he was the DIA program lead, the program manager, the director at DIA. The contractor was Bass, which was under Robert Bigelow and Bigelow Aerospace. And that was led by his own admission, Dr. Hal Puthoff. and that he was the one that essentially created the topics for the DIRD reports
Yeah.
that OSAP created,
Yeah.
and then obviously believed in a lot of this work, because the records that were
Yeah.
released on KONA Blue even talk about remote sensing abilities and remote viewing.
Oh,
and
I
that
want
they
to
would-
get to all this
Mhm.
here. Like, do you think that's why this got denied, because they finally just put it in writing? Like some of this stuff. I mean, let's go over some of the stuff. These
Mhm.
were the different points that KONA Blue was supposed to cover, right? They were going to have a data collection center, data analysis center, advanced technology center, experimental centers, consciousness center. That's what struck my,
Yeah.
it struck me, right? I think like a lot of people, medical center, education center, and they start to kind of break down what these things are, right? But again, it's kind of wish-washy, right? Because it's analyze, recover technology. What does that even be, right? Like, that could be just what we already do. We already recover technology from foreign adversaries. We already have retrieval programs set up for that, right? So like, like, I think the real thing was this, right? This consciousness center.
Yeah.
I mean, remote viewing, remote communication to communicate, retrieve data, and transport across dimensional space-time barrier. I mean, right? Develop remote viewing countermeasures, study consciousness interactions with and control of technology. I read that as, flying UFOs with your mind. I mean, I don't know what else to read that as,
Well, that's been
or
even
whatever.
prior to OSAP. I'll throw that out there, that the OSAP forward looking, I discovered that there was a program prior to that called Project Outgrowth. And Project Outgrowth, I got
Oh,
all the documents on it, actually explored at that time, and this was around the 1970s, I think it was. It
oh, I
was
never
about
heard of
40
this.
years prior to
Okay.
OSAP, and they
Oh, wow.
explored that. So that was one of the very, far-fetched ideas, but that's why OSAP at its core was nothing out of the ordinary. The government
Sure.
had a provable documented history that they had these forward-looking programs. So, yes,
That's fair.
you're right about the controlling of the mind, but they had actually explored that before, so nothing was out of the ordinary there.
Yeah, I see what you're
But
saying. So
obviously with the
that's maybe
remote
not a
viewing and
reason. Well,
no,
I'm
it
just
would be.
curious, like, why do you think they denied this program at the end of the day? Why do you think this program got denied?
Well, of course, it's pure speculation, but,
Yeah, it's pure speculation. We're just
yeah.
spitballing here, right?
I
We're
mean,
just
I
talking.
don't I don't see the Department of Homeland Security getting involved in remote sensing and consciousness, and paranormal research at Skinwalker Ranch. I
Got it.
just don't I don't
Yeah,
see it.
totally. Do you
So
think there is a government agency that would be open to signing off on a program like that?
well, I mean, I think that, the DIA has shown interest in that remote viewing before. I think that was called Project Sunstreak. We know it more as, the Stargate program at the
Yeah,
CIA.
yeah,
So you have intelligence agencies that, for intelligence purposes, could utilize that aspect of this proposal if proven to be true. Now, whether or not this part is reality, I'm not sure, but we know that the Stargate program was eventually canceled. They felt that they didn't have an intelligence value. That's the public story. Maybe there is an
yeah.
intelligence value. I'm not a remote viewer, so I don't know.
Sure.
But that being said, I mean, maybe there's an intelligence value there that, if proven, the intelligence community would latch onto. So that portion, absolutely. But the paranormal, skinwalker, werewolf type research, the dino beavers that were outlined in the book, that kind of stuff, that would not be in the purview of the DIA. So, you have to split this up, because you can't just do an all-encompassing program, which also may play a role in the cancellation of it, or the lack of interest, to where they're just
Yeah,
trying to do everything.
sure.
UFOs, UAP, paranormal, Skinwalker Ranch, which, by the way, it's not in dispute. That is what they're talking about. I think it may have been a mistake, but they didn't redact in all areas what ranch they were talking about. They do reference Bigelow Ranch, and then they also
Oh,
reference,
interesting.
yeah, they reference San Juan Valley in Colorado, and then also Marley Woods in Missouri.
Okay.
So you had three different locations. So they were obviously looking at that type of paranormal research on top of the remote sensing, on top of creating UAP databases that they already amassed allegedly through OSAP. So they were trying to do a lot
Wow.
here, and I'm sure
Yeah.
DHS saw that and went, uh, what? Like, why? What value to
What?
DHS would that be? So speculative on my part, but I just would think like they'd look at that and go, no, we're not gonna
Is
do
this the
that.
is this the same guy that made his lunch order top secret? You know what? Forget
It's-
these guys. We
yeah.
gotta,
Yeah, I
I
think
mean,
that
that's
that
interesting.
was probably part of it.
Yeah, I mean, you only have so much money to allot to different programs and whatever. Now, to be fair to this whole thing, I'm laughing about it here, but I'll be honest, the amount of money that we spend on crazy things in America, whatever, like I'm actually would be okay with voting to have 10, 20, 30 million a year devoted to some sort of program that
Mhm.
looks into this stuff. I actually would have zero problem with that. I'm not saying any of it's true or whatever. I'm just saying having some
Yeah.
and looking into it and seeing, yeah, why not? I don't have a problem um for that to happen. I guess it would just be more like any other government program. Is the money being used properly within what they said they were going to use it for? Right. I
Yeah.
think that's the key to it all. So yeah, if they got this money and really did some research and looked into it, I personally don't have a problem with it. Now, believing what comes out of it, that's a whole nother
Yeah, yeah.
conversation. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
That is
I'll probably
interesting.
surprise some people, but I fully support the same. Even the consciousness studies and all that I don't,
Yeah.
I don't really talk about a lot, and it's not really my cup of tea, but
Yeah, me
I'm
neither.
fine with that. If there's basis for the research, I'm fine funding it. The problem that I have are the organizations trying to get the money have seemingly not been as honest as they should be about what they've done in the past. And I
That's
think
fair.
that's a
That's fair.
big issue, and I think it stems from OSAP and how, as evidence has come out, it really contradicts that story that we've been told. Same is
Sure.
true with ATIP, same is true with a lot of these types of stories. So then I start asking different questions. So, yeah, I would fully support that as well, but give the money to the right people, the right organizations, and
100%.
make it scientific.
Yeah, 100, I couldn't agree more. Totally, 100% agree with that. Any other study that if we found out that the company that government we gave the contract to, they weren't using the money properly, we'd be equally as upset, whatever the thing is. So we should hold that as same accountability. But the idea that are most people open to it being studied, 100%. I think we
Yeah.
just want what you just said. Your statement is perfect. It's like we just want the right people working on it, who we can trust. Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. Yeah, some of these things in this Kona Blue, it just I mean, look, I guess I'm rarely surprised in this topic, to be honest with you, if I'm being real, right? Like the amount of stories you hear and experiences and all kinds of stuff. Like I'm rarely surprised, but I was a little surprised by some of the stuff. You know what? To me, it showed is the mindset of these people during this time where they were at.
Mhm.
I know the program got denied, but just their mindset of what they were thinking, the scope of what they want to study. Is it Do they want to study this stuff because they personally have seen the evidence that it's real, so therefore let's study it, or it's just theories and speculation and just something we should look into? Is it a mix? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
otherwise, what's the point of starting this program if you don't think there's any realness to it? Or is there another secret motive behind? Because why are you going to try to get 20, 30 million from the government and use a cover story of aliens and UFOs? Seems odd to get money that way from the government. You could figure out other ways to sort of rip off the government. I don't know why you'd want to put yourself out there like that. So I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that's because they sense there's something real that they want to go, or there's another motive? I don't know. If that makes
Well,
sense.
I mean, yeah, I want to believe that there is a sincere motive behind this. I mean, I've seen some interviews with Robert Bigelow and how he talks about consciousness
Yeah.
studies and afterlife and so on, and it becomes very emotional. So I don't want to just, with my skepticism say, oh, well, this is all malicious and about money. No, I think
Sure.
that there's some genuine interest to discovering this kind of stuff, but you
Yeah.
have to do it honestly, and you've got to communicate that to the public honestly. And
Yeah.
that's where then my skepticism really starts to take over, is even though I want to see that they would have that genuine motivation, or they've had an experience of their own, um, sometimes that's not always the case, and their stories
Yeah.
get really muddy. You just have to be honest, I think, in these types of fields of study. because again, it might not be my cup of tea personally, or I may not know a whole lot about remote viewing and how viable it is. Regardless, it's like you have to show, if you're going to get money for it, show that it's worthwhile and show that you're being honest while you're doing it, and I think that that's what we have to do. And if the government's not paying for you, again, you got to kind of piece this together. So taking
Yeah.
the remote viewing and remote sensing thing apart, you take that out. If you really do feel that there's something viable, there's already been a pile of money that has been spent on this through DIA and CIA. So if someone like Dr. Hal Puthoff really does have the goods and he feels like he discovered something, the remote viewing ability is not classified. He should go out to any major university or corporation or whomever and take that research and say, look, this is what we can do. Let's put some money towards it. So that's what's really weird to me, is that all of a sudden, some of these players that we hear a lot about over the decades, they always just seemingly land back at the government looking for money and wanting to do this for the government only, which has the track record of secrecy. So why would they
Yeah.
do that? Because that same person started TTSA and a private organization to get UAP material. So now, away from the remote sensing stuff, let's focus on the UAP aspect. That actually, was smart at its core. You've got a celebrity behind it. You've got people that may have certain contacts out there. On the surface, it was great. Go out there, raise tens of millions of dollars, and get this UAP material, and let's blow this open. Let's find that alien extraterrestrial connection. And from the private sector, let's show that to the world. And maybe
Totally.
governments will follow, right? So on the surface, that all sounded great.
The
And it was the
ambition
same people.
was respectable.
The ambition was there, and you want to see that genuine quality. What happened, though? This was the fascinating thing for me. They acquired multiple pieces of UAP material, alleged UAP material. And that's proven. I did a big interview with Linda Moulton Howe, diving into the piece that she sold to them. I think it was like for $40,000 or $30,000, whatever.
Yeah.
And so you have these pieces. What did TTSA do? They went right back to the military, and they created what's called CRADA with the U.S. Army to analyze that material there. So all of a sudden, all this stuff keeps going back to the military. Why more people don't question that is beyond me. So going back to what you asked, is there this genuine quality? Yeah, maybe. And I want to believe it. But somehow these people keep seemingly get themselves in these stories that are disproven later, have big red flags in the middle of them, or when they get material like Dr. Hal Puthoff and Tom DeLonge with TTSA, they get that UAP material, they bring it into themselves, turn it around, and walk it right into the doors of the U.S. military and gives them the results. So what
happened to that piece?
Part of that, what happened to the Linda Moulton Howe piece, or because there's quite a few pieces.
The TTSA, like they created, right? They had it studied by the military, I guess. What happened?
Well, TTSA is really mum about it. Yeah, on paper, the CRADA should be done. It went over the course of about 4 years, I think, or 5 years, and essentially it was an exchange of information. So are you familiar with it? Because I don't want to bore you to death if you're
no. I mean, can you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, the quick rundown is that the agreement, or this CRADA, was between TTSA and the Army, and essentially they were trading information. The trade was the Army gave TTSA access to their personnel or their expertise and the machinery and equipment to essentially test this material. In exchange, TTSA would give the results to the Army in hopes that they could utilize that for their own progression with technology. Specifically, it was for their what was it, the Ground Research Center, I think it was. I forget the exact sub branch of the Army, but regardless, they were sharing that information. So it was like, well, what happens if something comes back and it is classified, or excuse me, it is extraterrestrial? Will they classify that? And nobody ever addressed that. But if obviously that is unrightfully so, I agree with you. So then why would you do that? Why wouldn't you go out and stay within the private sector? So that was kind of a big debacle because it just kind of then vanished. TTSA wouldn't talk about it. So I've gotten documents from the US military, and ironically, the US military has been more transparent about that CRADA than TTSA, the same organization that preaches transparency, that they want to give
That's
the
funny.
general public answers. I can't get any answers from them, but the Army, through FOIA and through their public affairs office, have given me tidbits of information. So when you look at the historical report, they don't mention TTSA, but they do mention the material that was analyzed by the Army through that agreement.
Got it.
And
Okay.
one actually has a tie to the US Air Force, which I found very interesting. So I have filed cases for that information. Didn't sound like there was anything alien, extraterrestrial, even UAP related to it, but I'm very interested to see how that came out. Whole point being, you've now given the results to that material to the US government. And according to the report anyway, it appears that TTSA willingly gave them material to be tested, meaning AARO. So outside of the CRADA with the Army, the To the Stars Academy, what is now To the Stars Media, I think they disbanded the Arts and Science division, but that was willingly given to AARO for analysis. What that means to
Another
someone,
separate piece or the same piece?
right? So they can independently analyze it. Now they determined again that it was essentially nothing, that
Oh,
they could not confirm the magnesium and bismuth, I think it was, that they couldn't confirm what had been
okay.
floating out there already.
Sure.
But then on top of that, they said that one of the pieces was likely from Air Force technology, I think it was. But regardless, what that means for someone like me is the results through the CRADA with the Army are considered proprietary, so they would be exempt under exemption B4.
Got it.
But
Got it.
if they willingly give it to AARO and AARO funds the research themselves, guess what's
Yeah.
FOIA-able?
It's
That.
public.
So that's
Yeah.
what I've gone for. Public may be a
Okay.
little bit of a question mark, but
Or
they can't
whatever,
exempt it in the same way.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, your
it's
terminology is better.
you can go after it.
Okay, so that's interesting. So TTSA gets a piece of material from Linda Moulton Howe, and they give I guess they had to have given just a sample of it to the Army, you said?
Right. So Linda
Or
Moulton House sells it to TTSA, and then TTSA takes
to the
that
Army?
and correct.
Okay, to the Army, and takes the whole piece or a sample of it? Because you said they gave a sample to AARO. So are they giving the
It was
same
probably
piece
just a
floating
sample.
around?
That's
So
a
how are
guess,
they
but it's
breaking off a sample? Is like a Kit Kat bar where they just like, you know what I mean?
well,
How are
I had done
they?
a show for History Channel. We analyzed, ironically, one of the pieces that TTSA ended up getting their hands on. So
Oh,
based on that and getting people to analyze it and looking at past analyses on that piece. So I can't speak to Linda's because I don't know.
sure.
But just that one, what they do is they'll take the object, and in this case, it was about this big, and they'll
Okay.
shave off, a corner of it or a specimen, and then that is what's left with the
What do
laboratory.
they shave off? How? Like shave off? What does that mean?
Like,
Shave
well,
off?
in the case of that, it was what they determined was an aluminum alloy. This connects to what's called the Bob White object, and the analysis that was done prior to the History Channel show I wrote, that talked about the story, was they took this aluminum alloy piece, and then they literally just take a saw to it, and then they
A
cut.
saw? Okay,
Mhm.
like an actual saw.
Like an
Okay,
actual
gee.
saw,
So
and they cut like a nugget out of it. So that way, Bob, who's now deceased, he passed away a few years ago. But those
it's
that
so
own the
weird.
piece maintain it, and then that piece is left with the laboratory for analysis.
Got it. That's so weird to me that this advanced technology can just be cut with a circular saw. I don't know how.
Well, that's the
Seems
thing. I
odd to
mean,
me.
I'm
But
not
I
here
don't
to
know.
argue. Yeah, I'm not here to
I'm not a
argue it. The one piece was
metallurgist.
alien.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
just an aluminum alloy, but the aluminum alloy didn't match to any known aluminum alloy that we had, meaning
That's
an
interesting.
alloy is generally manufactured. Yeah, it was a cool piece for History Channel I did years and years ago, and then I brought him back for another show I produced for the same network that we kind of took the next step and told the story again. But it was very cool. A lot of debunkers, they say it was just a piece of slag from like a factory or something like that,
Oh, I've heard that a lot
which
about a
could
lot of pieces.
absolutely, yeah, I mean, and that could very well be true. But
Sure.
what was interesting about Bob's story was that he maintained it up until he died. He passed multiple lie detector tests, if you believe in those things. He had multiple labs, look at it, and they really couldn't figure out how it was done. they could find similar objects that were made, but no one discounted, because Bob saw it fall off of a piece of a UFO. And so during his encounter, this thing speeds off and a little piece had ejected and went down.
Piece. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he found it and had it for years and years. So
Okay.
yeah, I
I've
mean,
heard
it's a
that
fun
story
story.
before.
Yeah,
I've heard that
it's
story
been
in
around
South
for a while.
America, right? Well, there's been other stories like that happened in South America where pieces fall off of the UFO and they pick it up. And I think Gary Nolan has some pieces like that. So anyway, look, I know we're coming on your out time to get out of here, and I have a couple.
I
more
always hate
things
to have an
bring
out
up.
time, but today I had to have one.
No, it's
sorry.
all good. It's all good. That's we have lives to leave. For those of you watching, John and I have regular lives outside the UFO topic, so it's okay. Real quick, two things. One,
Sure.
I want to ask you about. I've been making this video. Well, I already made the video about Michael Herrera. It's this ex-Marine who had an event in Indonesia with the UFO, and I'm making a second video, a follow-up, because I got an exclusive interview for it that no one's talked to. Michael's team leader is finally going to come forward and talk to me for the first time ever and give some more context to Michael's story. But I'm curious, what do you know about Michael's story, and if you've even heard of it?
I've heard of it just in brief. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to have any fun contribution, just simply because that's not one that I've looked into. So I'll be eager to see what you come out with. Absolutely. But that's one story that I've just never really looked into. So I'm sorry, I don't have more to offer for you on that one.
No, all good.
The field
all
is
good.
so vast. It's hard to figure out what to focus on.
God. Absolutely. People ask me all the time, oh, have you heard of, I'm sure you get that too, right? Have you heard of this? Have you seen that? Have you did it? No, I haven't. And I'm new to this. You're deep in it 30 years. I'm barely a year in, if I'm being honest, of really looking into it, barely, not even a year. On the surface, like most people, just enjoying UFO content, whatever. Yes, a long time, my whole life. I mean, I'm an X-Files fan, but just as far as like really diving deep, definitely new to it all. And yeah, I don't know everything, or will I ever, if I'm being honest. Okay, last thing I'm going to bring up, John, is something that I just found interesting. I thought would be a good way to end here. Let me bring it up real quick. Okay, let's bring this up. Okay, so this is a tweet that Sean Cahill had sent out. And I typically, everyone knows I'm not on Twitter very much. I literally just post my videos and I peruse around. I don't comment on people's stuff. Very rarely do I. I'm not saying I don't, but it's very rare. I don't get in fights. I don't comment back. I don't care about Twitter or what anybody says on there, to be honest with you. I will block people right away and just move on. I don't like disruption. I just want to stay on it. But people sent this to me, actually, like, dude, have you seen what Sean Cahill sent out? And I thought, well, I'm talking to you. I figured we'd go over it. So Sean Cahill, who was I don't know, I would describe him as like Lou Elizondo's right-hand man, sort of scenario, ex-military, definitely, however you feel about him, he's definitely a figure up near the top of the UFO community, right? So he tweets out, no offense to folks with green, street, go, gal, wall, or duh sounds in their name, but you should learn to mask your router locations. Y'all kind of stanky at this for payroll. And I just thought, wait, what is happening? How can someone who's considered a leader in the UFO community tweet out stuff like this? Like, what was because in my opinion, he's talking about you. You're one of the people he's talking about, saying that he's, your router location. First of all, it's just creepy that someone is monitoring router locations and even looking into that stuff. Like, what are you doing, dude? Like, nothing against Sean Cahill. I don't know him. I've never met him. I've never spoke to him. I know I've made one video that included him, but that just seems creepy to me, to send out something like that and let people know you're doing that. I mean, that says more about him than what he's trying to get across in this message. But yeah, I'm curious how you took that, and if you do agree that he's talking about you.
I do. Yeah. You look at the wall and duh. That's a play on my name. My last name is Greenewald. So that's how you say Wald. On top of that, he's talking about Stephen Greenstreet. That's obvious by the first two. He's talking about Jeremy McGowan, who was a close associate and friend at one time of Sean Cahill and Luis Elizondo, who has, you know, I'm not going to speak for him, but obviously have done a 180 here. Used to be friends and very close with them to, you know, not so much, and has written some pretty scathing articles that, if for those who are interested, you should read them, because Jeremy's story is not alone. And I found that out over the years. And then the Go, and that's obviously, most people call her Susan Go. I had to increase my screen size here, so I'm sorry, my eye line's bad, but most people call her Susan Go. That's not even the correct pronunciation, but that's who she's referring, or that's who he's referring to. It's actually Susan Goff. So obviously he was talking about that. Then he makes the comment about the router location. Now, look, I'm not going to get into the technical mumbo jumbo here, but if you know anything about networking, routing, and what your 192 address is, means absolutely nothing. But it's the core of what he's trying to say about sniffing out people's routers and their location. And this is a trend by former counterintelligence agents and even former military people of intimidating those that are looking for answers. And my initial thought on this, as I shook my head thinking, this is getting ridiculous. This is getting out of hand, because the things that I'm doing, I'm looking into what our taxpayer money went to, and I'm looking at what taxpayer paid individuals did. There is nothing wrong with that, not from a journalistic standpoint, not even from a moral standpoint. And if they are so upset over what I'm finding, then it's not me they should be mad at. And they should be asking questions amongst themselves. And if they have answers to some of the questions that I've brought up, or some of the information I've come out with, then just answer it and address it and be done with it. And I've given the opportunity so many times to people that is largely and usually met unanswered. And that's not fair to instead of addressing those types of questions that a lot of people want the answers to. It's not fair to ignore that, but then turn around and start making these veiled threats about finding people's router locations and so on and so forth. You know, and it makes you wonder, what is this trend? Why are there these people that are tied into the same group that are making these types of veiled threats? And yeah, they're threats. And sadly, Sean is not the only one. There was another guy that was removed and banned from Twitter, who had a small following. It wasn't like somebody with 5 followers. Those I don't really even count or consider. But a guy who was entrenched in this conversation, who was banned from X for threats of physical violence against me personally. That they were going to find me and beat me on the street. And yeah, it was really bad. And sadly, that's not the only example of that, of people actually getting banned. So when you couple that are tied into this group, or that are big fans of this group, when you kind of look at all this, what are they doing? Like, why are they saying that my router location exposes,
and
like
the
what
part about payroll? Like, are they insinuating you're on government payroll? Or
Sadly,
that's
yes.
insinuation, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's another claim. I mean, there's a couple core claims that this group really falls back on a lot. And it has nothing to do with truth, accuracy, evidence, or taking what questions should be answered and actually answered them. Has nothing to do with any of that. It's more vilifying those that are asking the important questions. And we might not sit on the same page of belief sets, but is this really the spokespeople that we want out there? I mean, Sean Cahill, who's posting about this router location, is being put on MoonPie's national advertising campaign as some alien expert. He's a consultant for another organization that is trying to make a difference in the UFO and UAP world. Is that what people want? Like, is that really what people are advocating for? Not truth, transparency, and answering questions, but rather posting at 2. By the way, it was about 2:30 in the morning, I think, that he posted that. So in the middle of the night, you add that into it. What? So I know our time difference. I believe he's on the West Coast.
Even we're 4:21. Well, that's giving my, like, what it was for me during that time.
What time zone are you in?
And I'm in Central Time Zone. I'm in Texas.
Yeah, 2-hour difference. Yeah, so I saw it as about 2 something in the morning because I think he's on the West Coast. So regardless, you're posting these in the middle of the
Middle
night.
of the night,
There
totally.
are just a lot of issues that are arising that make others, including myself, uncomfortable. But I'm
Yeah,
also a believer that intimidation will not get me, and it hasn't in years. I've been
yeah.
legally threatened, even as early as about a month ago, um,
Oh, wow.
for legal action, reporting on government records, by the way, not making an accusation. Now that has been subsided and that has been smoothed over, but that was not the first legal threat that I received. You
Do you
look
want to
at
say who
posts.
that was, or you don't want to talk about that?
I'm not sure how much. I'm not trying to keep it a secret. But it may tie
Just
into
don't know
a
legally.
story. Yeah, it
Yeah,
may
I
tie
hear you.
into a story
Totally.
that I'm still seeking answers. So
Sure.
I'm waiting for those answers to come. So I'm not trying to be secretive,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
rather want to be fair and get the answers. Um, but yeah, and anybody can one of the legal threats that is provable, right off the bat is Luis Elizondo's attorney. Essentially, when I put a video online exploring documents that I got, said that certain things were legally actionable and essentially putting a veiled legal threat out there against me before the
You're talking
video
about
ever
Danny
even.
Sheehan, right?
No, this is Todd McMurtry, and
Wait,
that is
wait a second.
his
Is
that's
Danny
one of
Sheehan
his
not?
attorneys.
Oh, got it.
She
Is Danny
with other
Sheehan
stuff,
still his
McMurtry
attorney?
deals with what seemingly is more of the defamation accusations and stuff like that.
Oh,
Now
interesting.
I have since published stories where I've talked to him and just for the record, had very pleasant exchanges with him. But that particular tweet was public. A lot of people, including myself, saw it as a veiled legal threat just for talking about public records and questioning Luis Elizondo's story. So this has been a trend that has gone on for years, and
Crazy.
it's escalating. It's escalating to threats of physical violence, where people are getting booted off of social media platforms for, and then it's talking about router locations and IP addresses.
Yeah,
That's really dangerous territory.
I
And
agree.
even though it may be harmless or maybe it was taken the wrong way, I have also been an advocate for speaking out against this, and I have been very vocal about it. And even though, again, that some of our beliefs are different, I would hope that other big names that would see this would speak out also. And that could be our common ground of not having this devolve into some kind of, playground with threats of physical violence and,
Yeah,
tracking people through their router, but rather,
yeah,
hey, look, I don't agree with John Greenewald, but let's not threaten him. Or I don't
yeah,
agree with Luis Elizondo, but don't threaten him. I don't see the same threats towards them. I see that crowd that supports them coming after people like me, and I'm not alone. I'm not the only person on the receiving end here. There are multiple people that have received legal threats, received threats of physical violence, and I know for a fact that attorneys are involved on some level. So that's bad. That's really bad.
I
And
agree.
to add to the drama like that Mr. Cahill did, not my cup of tea. And I hope more people see it.
Yeah, man. No, well said. No, well said, man. Well, look, John, this was awesome, dude. I can't tell you enough, like how amazing this conversation was. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on Vetted. The vetter community is going to be super excited to see this and hear from you. And again, just want to reiterate, I know personally, I don't want to speak for my audience, but personally, again, I just really respect all the work that you do. It's why I wanted to have this
Thank you.
conversation with you and bring you on the show, and highlight some of your work and talk about some of your work, because regardless of, you know, how people feel about you personally, what you bring to the table and the amount of work you put, the amount of hard work you put in, that's what I frustrates me when I see people bashing you, is just like, dude, do you not realize that, like, how hard that guy works to bring you stuff that you then will quote in one of your tweets and don't give him credit for? It's just like, come on, man. You don't, he's just bringing documents. You use them
Yeah.
however you want. If he throws his opinion, well, we all have opinions. What? He's not allowed to have an opinion? You are, but he's not. I don't get it. So don't
It's a
worry
double
about all
standard,
those.
but I
Yeah, don't
appreciate
worry
your
about all
kind
those
words. Thank
haters,
you.
man. I promise you, a lot of them are trolls with 100 accounts, and they're telling you from 100 different ways. So you think it's 100 different people. It's not. The
Yeah.
majority of sane people, bro, support you and what you're doing. And I promise you, I've never had anyone that I've spoken to who I respect have nothing but nice things to say about you and the work that you do, man. So just
I
know that that's
appreciate
out
that.
there. So
Thank
anyway,
you.
just thank you, man, for taking the time.
It's my pleasure.
appreciate
I
it.
appreciate the opportunity and the time. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, dude. Can't wait for round 2. We'll
Let's
do
do it.
round 2, man.
Looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross